Ladies and gents, boys and girls, happy Thursday, July the 27th, 2023. Hope you're all doing well. Chris Phillips here, your host of the Daily Crow of the Spurs Up Show. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. I see Robbie Davis, Brendan, Jonathan Lee, Alex Mitchum, Travi, what's going on? Also those in the Big Cock Club Discord, head of the TDC Questions channel, the TDC Questions channel, to be sure that your questions are answered there. Again, we got a lot to get into, a jam-packed show. Apologies for being a minute or so late. Was on Inside the Gamecocks. Yes, we do have a guest, Brendan M. We do have a guest, Bryce Kuhn of 24/7 Sports. You said Slack Dickery abound today. Where is that, Brendan? What are you referring to exactly? My good buddy, let's get into what's in the show, guys. Of course, in our third hour, our Q&A Power Hour will take place. That full third hour will take your questions, your comments, your calls at 843-790-3377. In our second hour, we have my good friend Bryce Kuhn of 24/7 Sports. He talks all things LSU Tigers, used to cover the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, and of course talks SEC football as well. So we'll talk all things SEC, continue the SEC Media Days conversation, and also just get his thoughts on the 2023 SEC football season. And then, of course, guys, in this first hour, we continue with our 2023 opponent preview series, talking the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. Gamecocks on Gamecocks this season at Willie B. And, of course, guys, we continue the position at preview series as we start and get into the Gamecocks running backs heading in the 2023 season, which I assure you is going to be a very fun conversation over the next 2 days. Again, guys, appreciate you all. Thank you all so much for the love, the support. In case you missed it, we have dropped the brand new Beat shirts ahead of the 2023 season. The Beat North Carolina shirts are officially out. You can check that out on social media. It's actually not at tsus.store. We have collaborated with someone else to do these. Walker Kennedy on the art, fantastic job. The college collection as well. Be sure y'all check it out. Let's paint Charlotte garnet and black and show that South Carolina is the real Carolina. Brian Dean, C. Youngblood, GA, Lynn Turner, what's going on? Appreciate you all tuning in. Like I mentioned, we got a lot to get into, a jam-packed show. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and kick this thing off with our 2023 opponent preview series as it rolls on as we talk all things Jacksonville State. As our 2023 opponent preview series continues, it's Gamecocks versus Gamecocks at Williams-Brice Stadium this season as Jacksonville State comes to town to kick off the month of November. We've got Thomas Ashworth of the Anniston Star here to break down everything JSU football. Thomas, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. It is a pleasure to have you on. What's going on?
I'm doing good, man. Excited to talk some Gamecocks football with another person who talks about Gamecocks football.
It's weird to hear somebody else say that, but that know that they're not referring to the South Carolina Gamecocks. So
go
ahead.
And I was saying when it came up, I mean, it was like you said earlier, like low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And some people are going to be excited about Gamecocks versus Gamecocks.
Let's also point out, by the way, Thomas, before we get going, because I feel like too many people get this messed up. Jacksonville State is not in Florida. It is in Alabama. Okay, let's get that right. It's in the state of Alabama. I want to make that clear. Some people just do not realize that, or they're too lazy to do the research. Jacksonville State Gamecocks located in Jacksonville, Alabama. Either way, let's talk some JSU, Thomas. Again, appreciate you taking the time. Before we look at this season, let's look back. JSU goes 9-2, 5-0 in conference, their final season in the ASUN, which we'll get into in just a second. Just talk about what went right in year one of Rich Rodriguez, the new head coach.
I mean, almost everything that could have went right. I mean, really the lone hiccup was against Tulsa, a really powerful FBS opponent. But still, I mean, if a Rich Rodriguez offense is going to get coached, then it's going to succeed. I mean, things went right on the ground game. There were a lot of really big contributors that were able to step up who will also be returning, whether they're in their second year or their seventh year for a couple of them. But still, I mean, if Rich Rodriguez was just able to work with the offense that he was given, and most of the coaches that Jacksonville State's had, it's either been people who've coached high school, as people and besides Jack Crow, but still, Rich Rodriguez is probably just the most well-minded coach that Jacksonville State's had. So being able to see him work with the tools that he was given and find success was really encouraging.
Yeah, Thomas, Rich Rod is certainly well known. He spent a ton of time in the FBS level, and who better to lead Jacksonville State into that new era? Just talk about the mood and the vibe from the JSU fan base around having a coach like Rich Rodriguez on campus. Again, like you mentioned, I have to think that, the optimism is high when you have a guy with the experience, the knowledge, the leadership that a Rich Rodriguez has.
So when they were going around with the coaching hiring process, it was, are there some assistants from other FCS schools that could get hired? I think that the biggest high profile guy was somebody who coaches with the New York Giants who happened to coach at UAB. So people are like, oh, there's a connection there. But nobody would have imagined that they would bring in a guy like Rich Rodriguez. And there were plenty of applicants. I think that the job was attractive, obviously, because of the FBS move that was already announced. But still, I mean, the vibe is great. People are really excited. And, Rich Rodriguez has proven success at every level from NAIA all the way to FBS football, almost reaching a national championship. So when you bring a guy like that in, regardless, it's really exciting. But still, for Jacksonville State to land a guy like that, I mean, people were, I would say, shocked that they were able to land a guy of that high profile.
Now, Thomas, Jacksonville State is going through a major transition from the FCS to FBS this season, going to the Conference USA. Just talk about that transition, the pros, the cons. Obviously, there is an adjustment there, right? You go from sort of dominating FCS to now the level of competition certainly steps up, but certainly it's a positive mood. And as I mentioned, who better to lead them into it than a guy in Rich Rod who's been at the FBS level his entire career? Just thoughts on that move and that transition and how things are going in Jacksonville, Alabama, as they get ready for a new era of Gamecock football.
Well, with Rich Rodriguez, he's been there at every single level, like I said, but still, if they're playing a community college opponent, or if they're playing Alabama, he's going to treat it the exact same. He's going to treat practice the exact same. So, I was out there yesterday at practice, and somebody asked, "What's the vibe as they go into FBS?" And they said, "It's the same old, same old." Rich Rodriguez is still going to coach us the way that Rich Rodriguez coaches. As far as the money is concerned, everything's with the TV deals is really exciting. Jacksonville State has 2 weekday games, and in Jacksonville they have two more on the road. So that's also really exciting to be able to get a primetime slot, something that Jacksonville State hasn't had that much of, and now they get, I think, 5 or 6 primetime games. So really exciting as far as that's concerned, but the campus is also growing because of it. I mean, they're building a new field house, they're building new dorms, they're building everything, and it's taken a lot on the toll of parking, but still it's really exciting to see not just the football community grow, but also the campus grow as part of it.
Thomas, you mentioned the weekday games, and we'll get into the 2023 schedule a little bit later in the show, but you mentioned they play on a Wednesday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday. So there's going to be plenty of time to, in the middle of the week, you're looking for some good football to watch. Jacksonville State will be on TV for sure. Let's talk, Thomas, about this 2023 Gamecocks football team, which, again, I got to get used to that. When I say Gamecocks football team, I'm thinking South Carolina, but we're talking JSU. When you look at the offense, JSU got a huge boost when they heard that Zion Webb was approved for his 7th college season. He will return as QB1 this season. You've got Starling Galbon, PJ Wells, Ahmad Edwards leading the receiving corps. Sean Brown returns as a nice weapon for you at the tight end position. 4 of 5 offensive linemen return. And then Anwar Lewis and Ron Wiggins man the running game. So there's a ton of experience, and there already would have been, no matter what the situation would have been at quarterback, tons of experience on this offense. But getting Zion Webb back is the piece that I think had to land for Jacksonville State to probably hit their goals and really achieve this season in Conference USA. Just talk about the offensive side of the football, what you expect that to look like in Rich Rodriguez's second season.
For those that aren't, I don't know how many of those out there follow Jacksonville State football of your listeners, but there's 2 guys on the team that are returning for a 7th season for Jacksonville State. Quite the storyline. So kind of during the spring practice, we couldn't talk to Zion because of NCAA stuff, but still he was out there practicing, not knowing if he was even going to play in the fall. So when we found out the news and we broke the news, we immediately talked about it. as a positive. Whether it's a guy who's going to start, whether it's a guy who's going to be on the bench, having a guy that's been there since 2017 is a huge plus. But this guy, he's been an all-conference player. He's really dominant on the ground when he can be, and still, granted, Rich Rodriguez has plenty of quarterbacks to work with. I think the count yesterday that I counted was 9 quarterbacks on the roster. For reference, I think that the second most in Conference USA is 6. So there's plenty of quarterbacks to work with, but still getting a guy like Zion Webb, who has had proven success, whether they're playing in the FBS level or playing FCS football, it doesn't matter. Still having a guy like that's really exciting for Rich Rodriguez for sure.
Now, Thomas, you look at the defensive side of the football, Chris Hardy and J-Rock Swain, which, by the way, a name J-Rock, that's got to be one of the best names in college football. Chris Hardy, J-Rock Swain, they man the edges. They combined for 10.5 sacks last season. Anthony Nesby and Jackson Latrette are in the interior defensive line. You've also got Auburn transfer Colby Fuqua. Is that how you say his last name? I think that, yeah.
I think so.
Something like that. Either way, Auburn transfer in the linebacker position. He's going to lead that linebacker core, a really nice player and a really nice pickup there. And then Jamari Jemison, Jeremiah Harris, they return in the secondary. And it's a defensive group that I think that's probably where the biggest transition is going to be, right? Going from the A-Sun to defending against these Conference USA offenses. Just talk about the defensive side of the football and what you're expecting from that group this season.
I mean, watching Conference USA football, you know that it's a lot of points, and it can be when it wants to be. But and Rich Rodriguez likes scoring a lot of points too. But there's still some solid contributors. I mean, J-Rock Swain, he's a hometown guy. He grew up like 20 minutes down the road from Jacksonville State. He'll be a huge contributor. And Chris Hardy, like you said, I mean, there's 2 guys who have really been anchors in the FCS level. I don't see why that wouldn't change at the FBS level. And Jeremiah Harris, he's the guy that he's returning for a 7th season as well. Last season, he wasn't sure if he'd play, but this season he's able to play. So I think that the secondary will also be pretty good, considering that there's a guy that was there for a 7th season and he's still succeeding and he's really doing well. I mean, yesterday he said, "Oh, they're calling me grandpa and pops and uncle and all that." But still having a guy like that to lead the defense is really strong. But like you said, there's really some talented pieces, and I don't really see an immediate hole in the defense, which is really exciting, especially when you look at sometimes, in Jacksonville State's last couple seasons where there were some holes, but still, this is a really loaded group of defensive players, and I think that there's still some coming in from the transfer portal too. So it's really exciting for sure.
Now, Thomas, moving to special teams, Alan Karajic is back at kicker, Jack Dawson's at punter, Michael Petway and Sterling Galbon man the return game. Anything stand out, anything stand out in regards to Gamecocks special teams heading into the year?
Well, Alan Karajic is a guy that was he was borderline snubbed from the all-conference team last season. He made more kicks. He had a higher field goal percentage. He had a higher average kickoff from the guy that got the honor, but he still was snubbed. So he's a guy that probably doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. He is money most of the time. You can count on him for sure. And Jack Dawson's he's an all-conference guy as well. Really exciting to watch him punt. He's from Australia. A little Jacksonville State trivia if you're ever in Jacksonville. But there's a lot of guys who could be returning the ball. I mean, there's, like you said, Mike Petway and Sterling Galvin. I think last year or the last couple of years, Ahmad Edwards saw snaps at kick returner as well, but he transferred to Ball State, so they're losing him, and they're really experimenting a lot with the kick returner position. There's a guy as well that we saw in the springs. He plays quarterback, but his name's Carter Lambert, but he was one of the fastest guys on the team. So Rich Rodriguez is really saying, if you're talented and and you want to play and you have the desire to play, we're going to put you somewhere. It might not be your desired position, but we're going to try you on a lot of places. So I wouldn't be surprised to see 4 or 5 guys that return punts or kicks at some point in the season for Jacksonville State.
So, Thomas, looking at JSU overall, 14 starters are back. So it's a veteran group, 8 on the offensive side, 6 on the defensive side. You look at the 2023 schedule, you open up actually in week 0 against UTEP. Then you have East Tennessee State at Coastal Carolina. That'll be a really fun one. Then you have the bye week Eastern Michigan, which is your homecoming. Then you mentioned these kind of middle of the week games. You have at Sam Houston on a Thursday, at Middle Tennessee on a Wednesday, Liberty at home on a Tuesday, Western Kentucky at home on a Tuesday, at FIU on a Wednesday. Then you go to South Carolina. You have that second bye week, of course, because you open up in week 0. Then you close out with Louisiana Tech and at New Mexico State. So just talk about that 2023 slate, how it sets up for Jacksonville State, and what do you feel like are realistic expectations in year 1 of FBS competition for this football program?
Well, obviously, this is the hardest schedule Jacksonville State's had in its history, considering they're at the FBS level. But still, there's some really exciting matchups. I mean, I think that UTEP is going to be an exciting game just because I think that is pretty on par as far as talent level. Still, UTEP has a really solid offensive line, but still, there's a lot of people who don't really understand that Jacksonville State dominated at the FCS level for so long, and they're getting so many pieces from FBS teams that still, I think that they'll be able to make some noise. I think that honestly, they have their first 3 out of their 4 games are very winnable. Coastal Carolina has been a solid team, top 25 team for a long time. So that may give them some struggles on the road, but still, I think that the opening slate's really exciting and very winnable games. Against FIU, they beat FIU only 2 seasons ago. And that's still a team that, granted, they finished below them in the Conference USA poll, but still, it's that's a very winnable game. And Jacksonville State's had success against FBS opponents before. They took down Florida State just a couple seasons ago. Very exciting, but still, I mean, it's so hard to say just because I don't think that if you plug Rich Rodriguez into a lot of teams, I think that they'll be able to find success sooner more than later. So really, I can't really put a number on it, honestly. If they won 8 games, I wouldn't be surprised, just because of the kind of the culture that Rich Rodriguez has been able to instill in just his last couple seasons here.
And Thomas, that leads me into what I wanted to ask, because it sounds like that, with Rich Rodriguez leading the way, it sounds like Jacksonville State and their fan base, and obviously those around the team, feel very confident that, JSU can not only make the transition to FBS into Conference USA, but that they can become a power at Conference USA based off of just what they've done in years past.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, they made the national championship in 2015 at the FCS level, and Rich Rodriguez knows, that he's there to win. And the way that if you went out there and you watched practice, you would know that it's different. It's way different than in years past. And the players say it's so fast paced. Like I'm having a hard time keeping up, but still, it's the way that the culture is around here and the way that Rich Rodriguez is running it. I mean, it's just taken to the next level. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jacksonville State surprised a lot of people. And that's not me just saying that. That's me being genuine and saying I think that they'll be able to win a few games that people might not expect this season.
Thomas, it's Gamecocks versus Gamecocks at Williams-Brice Stadium. I got to know, what was your thoughts when you saw the announcement that it was going to be South Carolina, Jacksonville State, first ever meeting, but Gamecocks versus Gamecocks? I wondered, and when I saw the announcement, first off, I chuckled. Second off, I just wondered, how has this never happened before, right? We get the battle of the USCs, the battle of the Carolinas, which is how South Carolina will begin their season this year against UNC. It's long overdue that we have the battle of the Gamecocks. What was your immediate reaction to seeing that this game would be on the 2023 schedule?
I think you said it best. I think it's long overdue. I mean, these two programs have been around for a long time, and to see them not having played, considering they're both Gamecocks, is kind of a little bit surprising. But still, I mean, I think it should be really exciting. It gives Jacksonville State a strong opponent as they head into the FBS level. But still, I mean, regardless of what level you are, going against an SEC opponent is always exciting.
Thomas, I don't know how much South Carolina football you've been able to watch or kind of see the program from afar, but what are your thoughts on the Gamecocks football program coming into year 3 under Shane Beamer? Obviously, everybody probably took notice of last year, close out the season, beating Tennessee, beating Clemson, back-to-back top 10 wins. Just overall thoughts and what you feel. I mean, again, it's way down the road. They're focused on getting ready for week 0, but how does JSU Nation feel about this matchup?
Yeah, a little bit about me. I mean, you might kick me off the podcast for this, but I grew up a Georgia fan, so I'm very, very familiar with South Carolina football. They're the team that, I mean, you could never guarantee a win, no matter if they were 0-9 or 9-0. You couldn't guarantee a win or a loss against South Carolina. So I know the kind of wild card that South Carolina brings, but watching Shane Beamer coach is very exciting. I enjoy watching his football and the way that South Carolina plays football. And going against Rich Rodriguez as well, I think that there would be, if it goes the way that the tickets kind of want them to go, I think that it could be a really high scoring matchup. I think that'd be a lot of fun to see. But I'm very familiar with South Carolina historically, and watching them in the last couple of seasons, I mean, it's been really exciting. So whatever way you want to paint this, I think it'll be a really fun game for sure.
Well, and Thomas, it's Gamecock fans chalk this up as a win. At South Carolina Gamecock fans, they chalk this up as a win. Most folks are going to look and say, put that as a W. But to your point, I think what's interesting, I mean, this is a JSU team led by Zion Webb, a veteran quarterback, that they've gone into Doak Campbell and beat Florida State. So, I don't think they'll be necessarily intimidated by 80,000 at Williams-Brice. I think they'll look at it as an opportunity. Obviously, I think we all agree the South Carolina Gamecocks should be the favorite and should likely win. But I say this, don't sleep on JSU, man, because they've been there before. And, if you think you're just going to roll your helmets out there and beat Jacksonville State, especially under Rich Rodriguez, I think you might have another thing coming.
I mean, if you look at their history with SEC opponents, I mean, the first points on Auburn's scoreboard were scored by Jacksonville State. They took them to overtime in 27 or 28 to 20. I don't remember. But still, I mean, they've had success against SEC opponents in the past. I don't see why Rich Rodriguez run team wouldn't be able to find success in that same way.
Thomas Ashworth of the Anniston Star does a fantastic job talking all things Jacksonville State Gamecocks football. Thomas, cannot wait for the matchup. Let everyone know where they can check out all your work.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter, Thomas Ashworth 0. We post a lot of articles. We post podcasts that we host. If for some reason there's a Jacksonville State fan among your listeners, go check it out. But still, I mean, we're gonna be down there at the South Carolina games, so we'll be tweeting about it in some way or another. But I mean, thank you for having me on the show. It was really fun.
Thomas, I appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Let me say this: may the best Gamecocks win.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, that was our Jacksonville State opponent preview. Appreciate Thomas Ashworth of the Anniston Star taking the time. Going to be a fun matchup. Gamecocks on Gamecocks. Who are the real Gamecocks? Of course, guys, we expect South Carolina to win. I think it's safe to say South Carolina will win. But coached by Rich Rodriguez, a JSU team that transitioning from the FCS to Conference USA, a 7th-year quarterback. Could be fun. Could be a little bit higher scoring than we expect. I think South Carolina takes care of business, but really, truly appreciate, I want to say again, Thomas Ashworth of the Anniston Star. Obviously, guys, as you can imagine, very easy to find people to talk Georgia, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Florida, Tennessee, you name it. You start talking about Furman, JSU, it gets a little bit harder. So I appreciate it. It was awesome. I literally went to Twitter, just searched Jacksonville State football, started digging through. I'm like, who can I talk to about the other Gamecocks? Thomas Ashworth was a fantastic guest. Guys, that being said, let's keep the convo rolling. We got a lot of content to get into here on this Thursday. So I want to go ahead, keep rocking. We don't need a break after the conversation. We're talking South Carolina running backs as our 2023 position unit preview series continues. And this is one of, if not the biggest question mark on this South Carolina football team in terms of position units. You look at last season, a season ago, really briefly, the big loss, of course, in the transfer portal was the loss of Marshawn Lloyd. And while I know he was banged up, maybe he didn't quite achieve what folks set out for him, there is no question. If South Carolina fans are being honest with themselves, that is a departure that still stings, and it's a departure, guys, I still to this day, simply put, do not understand. 111 carries, 573 yards rushing, 5.2 yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns for the Gamecocks a season ago. So when healthy, He was a very productive player, 18 receptions for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. You lose that production. Jaheim Bell was your second leading rusher. He is gone via the transfer portal. 261 rushing yards, 3.6 a carry, 3 touchdowns. Of course, we know what he did in the receiving game, but you lose 12 touchdowns from those top 2 guys. You also lose Christian Beal-Smith, who I know didn't play a ton. He battled injuries of his own as well, but 156 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns last season. So, guys, you lose 17 touchdowns, 17 rushing touchdowns from running backs on your roster a season ago, when there are questions abound when it comes to this group. And in case you missed it, the group heading in the 2023 season, DJ Twitty, DeKevion Joyner, who has moved over full-time to running back, Mario Anderson, Bradley Dunn, Juju McDowell, Nathan Harris-Wainick, Chase McCracken, and DJ Braswell. As we dive into our top storylines for the Gamecocks running backs entering the 2023 season, as I just mentioned, a running game and a running back group with tons of questions and, simply put, not many answers. The first place I go is this, guys. Is there a SEC caliber RB1 on the roster? And let me say this, it brings me to this, and it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we're going to have it anyways. Sitting at SEC media days, listening to other head coaches, and looking at other rosters, I look at a team like Kentucky and South Carolina after the departure of Marshawn Lloyd and Jaheim Bell. We knew the Gamecocks needed to go out and get a running back. We said it over and over and over. South Carolina, they need to go out. They need to get a running back. They need to get a proven ball carrier. And if you don't believe me, South Carolina tried, right? The whole Logan Diggs thing that happened, he goes to LSU. It's not because the Gamecocks did not try to land someone. Yes, you get Mario Anderson from Newberry, Division II. But you look at a roster like Kentucky. They added a 1,000-yard rusher in the SEC from Vanderbilt in Ray Davis and added Demi Sumo from NC State. Meanwhile, South Carolina adds no one from the Power 5 level. And that has me, honestly, guys, still perplexed. It still has me scratching my head of, how did we get to this point? Because when you ask the question of, is there a SEC caliber RB1 on the roster? I said this after the spring as well. I think there are a lot of nice supporting cast pieces. I think this running back room is full of a bunch of guys who are RB2s and RB3s. I don't see an RB1 in this group, at least right now. Now, could somebody develop into that? Could DeKevion Joyner be that guy? Could Juju McDowell have his best season yet? Could Mario Anderson make the transition? We shall see, and we'll get there in this conversation, don't worry. But is there a bell cow back on this roster? I just don't think we know yet, based off of what we know. And as I mentioned, the production you lost, here's your returning production, guys, from 2022. Your leading rusher returning, Juju McDowell, a season ago, had 62 carries for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. Your second most productive running back entering this season, it's a guy that wasn't a running back until 4 months ago, DeKevion Joyner. He had 12 carries for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's where we really begin when we dive into the nitty-gritty, talking top storylines. DeKevion Joyner, his journey continues with a move to running back. And this is a guy that's already solidified, He has solidified his place as a legend in Gamecocks football history. He is, I've talked about before, and this is the most complimentary thing, one of the most complimentary things you can say, he is one of those college football folk heroes where when you look back 10 years from now, DeKevion Joyner won't be remembered for making an All-American team or throwing 50 touchdowns in a season or rushing for 50 touchdowns or on the national scale, like being remembered for anything of that nature. But because of his sacrifices for Gamecocks football, being willing to do whatever the team asked him to do, and being damn productive when he's done it, he has solidified himself as a folk hero in Gamecock Nation. Now the question turns to, can he overcome and can he embrace his biggest challenge yet? And that is going from quarterback to wide receiver, but to now being a running back and maybe even being RB1 when this thing kicks off in just over a month. what are realistic expectations for the Kerryon Joyner? What can you realistically expect? Because again, guys, I've seen a lot of chatter this offseason about, could the Kerryon Joyner rush for 1,000 yards? Like, how easy do we think it is to play running back? Like, anybody can just plug and play and do it? Jaheim Bell was also a great athlete, guys. He was not a great running back. I don't think it's a situation where, I don't think you're giving enough credit to the nuances of the running back position. I know the running back position is one that has lost tons of value over the years, especially in the NFL, but it's still not as simple as just, oh, you're athletic? Okay, you can play running back. If it were that easy, there'd be a lot more 1,000-yard rushers walking around than there are. Another thing, guys, Mario Anderson, another new player. Can he make the transition from Division II football to the SEC? Hey, Newberry, go Wolves. And Mario Anderson, he wasn't just good at Division II. He wasn't just good at Newberry. We're talking about a guy that rushed for over 3,000 yards in his career. He was up for the Division II version of the Heisman Trophy. I mean, this is a guy, he was fantastic in the SAC, the South Atlantic Conference, as it's known. But this is the SEC. And listen, I know I've had questions before. They're well documented. Anytime a guy is making a transition or a jump from a lower level to SEC, I think it's a talking point. I think it's a storyline. I said it about Juice Wells last year as well. Hey, high on him, but is there going to be a transition period? By the way, I'd argue there was, because Juice Wells didn't become Juice Wells until I'd say the second half of the season. There were flashes early, but I don't think he really became that lethal threat, that go-to guy until the last 3 or 4 games of the year. With Mario Anderson, is it something similar? And does he have a ceiling like a Juice Wells? Juice came from FCS and was a FCS All-American to SEC. Not only has Mario Anderson not played in the SEC, not only has he not played in the Power 5, he hasn't played Division I football, guys. He's been at the Division II level at Newberry. We saw some flashes in the spring game. He's a big-body dude. He's a bowling ball type of running back. Could be really good around the goal line. Is he a guy that steps up as RB1? The position battle over the course of fall camp is going to be fascinating. Mario Anderson certainly will factor in. My attention then turns to Juju McDowell. How is Dowell Loggins going to utilize Juju McDowell? Juju's a guy I hyped up a lot last year. I was really excited. I thought as a true freshman, he was, and he was really, really good. I hyped him up. I thought he was fantastic as a true freshman in 2021. Thought he could do even more a season ago. For whatever reason, didn't really happen. And guys, we saw what happened when Juju McDowell was asked to run the football at the middle. When he was asked to run between the tackles, nothing. I recall vividly in that Missouri game, watching that game and just watching that play get blown up, play after play after play. I think Dowell Loggins and Shane Beamer are smart enough to know what his strengths and his weaknesses are. And I think Juju's a guy, you saw it in the Clemson game. This is a dude that is explosive. He can make big plays for you, but he is your scat back. He is 5'7". He is not going to run between the tackles. He's not going to be your RB1. He's not a 20 to 25 carry per game type of guy. I don't even know if he's a 15 carry per game type of guy, but he can help you. You can utilize him. I'm excited to see how Dowell Loggins utilizes him in this offense. You then look at newcomer DJ Braswell, guys. How quickly can the 4-star prospect, the 4-star signee, how quickly can he get up to speed? And I tell you this, if I had to pick one guy, who's the guy you think is going to pop? I think there's a case you can make for every single one of them. DJ Braswell is really, really intriguing to me. And his stock, I feel like, and the chatter around DJ Braswell has been going up over the last couple of months. People are really excited about this kid when you cut on the film and you look at the size, the speed, the agility. And we talked about, guys, the youngsters, depending on youngsters. And maybe, just maybe, Shane Beamer and company didn't go to the portal because they believed in a guy like Braswell. Like, we don't need to go get anybody else. We got a guy. He's on the way. We talked before about depending on freshmen, depending on youngsters, how the success of this season is going to rely heavily on these newcomers. I think DJ Braswell is one of them. I think this is a guy that needs to, hey, listen, he's going to get into fall camp and it's going to be on. Drinking water out of a fire hose. But that's the position you're in. You've got to thrust a freshman into action. How quickly can he grasp it? How quickly can he get up to speed? How quickly can he make an impact for South Carolina? And finally, guys, my final top storyline with this Gamecocks running back room is just the overall strategy, right? I fully expect Dakereon Joyner to be the starting running back going into the North Carolina game. And while I'm excited for that, I just wonder, is it a situation in which it's going to be by committee? Is there going to be a true RB1? Does Dakereon Joyner take the bull by the horns and embrace that, and he carries the load all season? And, guys, I'll get there in a second, actually. That's our next segment. I want to talk more about Dakereon Joyner. Anyways, is it an RB1 situation? Is it by committee? Do they go with the hot hand week to week? I mean, I think there are advantages to both of the options, right? I mean, obviously, if you find a true RB1, that's fantastic. What worries me when you don't have that guy, because some people say, well, what does it matter? What does it matter? But it's 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, 4th and goal, 3rd and goal, and you're in Neyland Stadium and it's a one-score game. Like, who are you giving the ball to? That's my question. Who are you giving it to? Do you have that guy you can lean on, right? Because the offensive line's a question. We're going to get there. Don't worry. We're going to get there. But great running backs, a lot of them, guys, they find a way to get a yard. They find a way to get 2 yards. They find a way to get an inch. They find a way to get in. They find a way to gain yardage. And so that takes me back to as well, like, I just don't think it's fair to sit here and say, well, just plug anybody in. They can play running back. Like, that's not fair. It's just not. That's just not. If that were the case, everybody would be Marcus Lattimore. Everybody would be Mike Davis. Everybody would be Kevin Harris. It's just not fair to say that anybody can play the position. So is it one of those things? And Montario Hardesty is already an assistant coach who is under some real pressure, some real heat. How does he handle the running back room? How does Dowell Loggins assist in that handling of the running back room? Is it something where Dakereon Joyner emerges, gets the bulk of the carries? Is it something where Juju McDowell is utilized in a pass-heavy offense? Does Mario Anderson emerge and take the bulk of the carries? DJ Braswell. And I'll say this, by the way, because I want to point this out. Some of you are screaming at me, Chris, what about DJ Twitty? What about Nathan Harris-Wainick? What about Chase McCracken? What about Bradley Dunn? Guys, listen, I'm going to be honest. There are 4 running backs on this roster that can realistically or will realistically have an impact this year. Their names are Dakereon Joyner, Mario Anderson, Juju McDowell, and DJ Braswell. I'm not trying to be disrespectful with the rest of those guys. They've been in college, a lot of them 3, 4, 5 years, and don't even have 100 yards rushing to their name. I don't see that changing this year. It's going to be tough to get carries if you're RB5, if you're RB6, if you're RB7. I don't think there are answers beyond those top 4 guys. Hell, you're having a hard time finding answers in the top 4, much less beyond them. But I think early on, just finding whatever combination of guys works. Because is running the football going to be the strength of this team? It's not. No, it's not. But you've got to find a way to manufacture some sort of running game because you got to have some balance. It may not hurt you against UNC. It won't hurt you against Furman. But you get into SEC play against Georgia, against Tennessee, against Mississippi State, Florida, Mizzou, on down the list, and you're one-dimensional, you're not going to like the end result. South Carolina will struggle to move the football. And there's evidence of that the previous couple of years. A rushing attack to finish outside of the top 100. I don't remember the last time they did finish inside the top 100. I guess 2020. Outside of that, it's been a while. So this is a running back group, guys. We could spend this entire, we could spend hours talking about this group. There's talent in the room, no doubt. And it's a fascinating position group. Because, again, you've got a guy like Dakereon Joyner who, what a storybook ending to his career it would be. He does everything for the team. Be asked, he's asked to move to running back. And I'm going to refrain from the fact that he was asked to move to running back, I just don't think it should have ever come to that, to be honest with you. I don't understand how and why South Carolina did not go out in the portal and land a running back. I will never understand that. And that's okay. I don't have to, but the De'Kerryon Joyner, a lot of pressure is being put on him. But maybe he can have that storybook ending to his career. Maybe Juju McDowell, used in creative ways, can, be a threat. Maybe DJ Braswell's a true freshman, breaks out and turns into a star. Or maybe a guy like Mario Anderson picks up where he left off at Newberry College. One thing is for certain, though. This running back position group, it's one of, if not the biggest question marks on this Gamecocks football team, and something that will be priority number one when South Carolina takes the field next week and begins fall camp. Guys, that being said, we'll jump into our first break of the day. On the other side, we'll keep the conversation rolling here on this Thursday. You're tuned in to the Daily Crow.
Muscle Dougie, ho. Muscle Dougie, ho.
All right, guys, we're back here on this Thursday, July the 27th, 2023. Again, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in here on this Thursday. Guys, really exciting times right now as we break down all these position units. I love just getting in the nitty-gritty and giving projections and predictions and talking about it. And you learn so much about the football team when you break down every position group and you kind of uncover, okay, there's some new freshman guys, there's these guys, whatever. So it's a ton of fun, and I hope you guys truly do enjoy it. Again, don't forget, in hour number 2, we have my good friend Bryce Coon at 24/7 Sports. He covers LSU, but also talks all things SEC, so we'll break all that down with him. And then hour number 3, our Q&A Power Hour, which I'm really excited to hear from each and every single one of you today. With that being said, guys, we'll go ahead, keep the conversation rolling here on this Thursday as we're talking all things Gamecocks, running backs. Which South Carolina running back has the most to prove this season? And it almost feels like somewhat of a trick question because throw a dart at a dartboard and whoever it hits, that's who you pick. I mean, everybody in this room has something to prove, right? Whether it's the true freshman DJ Braswell, it's DeCarrion Joyner, it's Juju McDowell, it's Mario Anderson going from D2 to SEC. Heck, it's a guy like a DJ Twitty who hadn't really gotten an opportunity. I mean, you name it. Everyone in this room, this entire group, has a lot to prove. And I think that's fair to say when you've got a grand total of 275 total rushing yards and 4 touchdowns returning from a season ago. But for the sake of the conversation, we're going to pick one. And the ball carrier to me, who has the most to prove, he has the most pressure to succeed, DeCarrion Joyner. Guys, he's not just moving a running back to be a depth booster. This is a guy, as I've mentioned many times previously, I'm fully expecting to be RB1 when the season kicks off in Charlotte, North Carolina. What a career it's been. When you really stop and you reflect, what a just wild sequence of events it's been. I mean, you think back to when he got on campus, what was it, 2000, I believe 18 it was, his first year on campus, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was around 2018 in the Will Muschamp era. Comes to South Carolina because he thinks he's going to get an opportunity to play quarterback. I'll never forget in the, I believe it was 2019 spring game, when he made some plays, did some big things, and he was asked in his media availability, would you consider changing positions? Like that conversation, for whatever reason, surrounded DeCarrion Joyner from the jump. I don't know that he really ever got a fair shake and a fair look at the quarterback position. Either way, that's a conversation for another day. But he told the media straight up at that point, listen, if I wanted to play a different position, I would have went to Alabama. I would have went to Clemson. I came to South Carolina because I wanted to play quarterback. That's a pretty strong statement, especially for a guy who was eventually moved to wide receiver. In 2019, he had the big moment at quarterback where he came in and played the entire second half of the 2019 Georgia game and steadied the ship after Ryan Helinski went down with an injury and helped lead the Gamecocks to, I would say, the biggest upset win in school history, at least one of the biggest. After that, he made a selfless move, guys, flat-out selfless move in moving to wide receiver to help the football team. Coaching change occurs. Shane Beamer takes over. Many of us said, okay, DeCarrion Joyner is going to transfer. After 2019, folks said that. After 2020, folks said that. After 2021, folks said that. Never happened. DeCarrion Joyner has been all Gamecock from the start. And, I mean, his career, I feel like it's a tale as old as time. Every year at this time, we all sit around and say, is Dakereon Joyner going to get the ball more? Is he going to get more touches? Is he going to get more looks? Get it to Dakereon. And let's call it for what it is, guys. He's never really been featured the way that I think most that wear the garnet and black would like to see him featured. He's a guy you can't help but pull for. Again, he's selfless. He does everything he's asked. Does everything he's asked for the football team. Completely selfless player, and it's why, as I've mentioned, he's turned into a folk hero in Columbia, which I would say, guys, honestly, as a college football player, that is the greatest honor that you can receive. Because you are a hometown hero. You are a campus legend. Like, however you want to phrase it, a folk hero is the way that I describe it. Dakereon Joyner has solidified himself that, and he would have been that even if he wouldn't have came back this year. But now he faces his greatest challenge yet, and that is going from wide receiver and being moved to running back, and not just being asked, hey, just be in the room in there and boost the depth. He's expected to be RB1 heading into week 1. You look at his career carries, okay? These are the rushing carries. These are the rushing statistics for Dakereon Joyner heading into his final season in Columbia. 64 carries, 325 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I will tell you this. If you are looking for positive signs, Dakereon Joyner's yards per carry, 4.5 yards per carry. So, I mean, he's explosive with the ball in his hands. We saw a little bit of it in the spring game. He is explosive when he gets the football. There's no question. It seems like every time Dakereon Joyner touches the football, good things happen. It's been very rare that he's touched it, but when he does, when he gets the ball, good things tend to happen. As I mentioned, it's his first year being a full-time running back. He is a running back on the roster, folks. And he is looking to end his career in a storybook fashion, leading this rushing attack. There is a lot of pressure on 5 to get it done this year. There is a lot of pressure in this move for Dakereon Joyner. The expectations are sky high. The pressure is sky high on Dakereon Joyner. And I think while he's someone that can make it happen, he's overachieved just like Shane Beamer at every turn. Again, this is his greatest challenge yet. Because I don't just think it's something as simple. It wasn't as simple as just move to receiver and be a 1,000-yard receiver, was it? Dakereon Joyner didn't really make guys that big of an impact. Let's call it for what it is. And this could be the move that should have been made all along. With the ball in his hands, he's a natural athlete. Makes things happen. Makes people miss. But at the end of the day, he's a wide receiver playing running back. That's what it is. He's an athlete playing running back. You are asking a player that has been at wide receiver the past 2-3 years to come in and be your RB1. That is not a small feat, guys. That is not a small task to accomplish. We are all pulling for it to happen. We are all hoping for it to happen. And if there's anybody that can make it happen, he's proved the doubters wrong at every turn. It's a guy like Dakereon Joyner. But there is no doubt when you factor in, and let me say this too, since we're on the note, this is what I most wanted to get into. I think fans need to set realistic, fair expectations for Dakereon Joyner. Don't put DK in a position to where if he doesn't rush for 1,000 yards, he just, that's a disappointment. That's not fair to him. It's really not, in my opinion. In my mind, guys, you can call this being conservative. You can call this, I'm just being realistic with a guy that's a wide receiver playing running back, an athlete playing running back. He's not a running back by trade. If Dakereon Joyner can rush for 500 or more yards this year, that, in my opinion, guys, is a massive success. That is a massive success. And it's not because he's not capable of more, but there are other bodies in that room. The offensive line's a concern. We're going to get there and talk about them. This group can't do much without that blocking up front. But you see the people on social media, 1,000 yards. And I know folks are just trying to get people pumped up for the season, but let's really keep some realistic expectations. 500 or more yards is the number for me. If Dakereon Joyner can hit 500 or more rushing yards in this season, because he's still going to be used at wide receiver. I expect him to use him in a number of ways. And based off what Shane Beamer said at SEC Media Days, guys, DeCamerion Joyner is going to be a focal point of the offense. He's going to be one of your big-time, your key pieces right there with Juice Wells and Xavier Legette and Trey Knox and all the others. But keeping realistic expectations for a guy who has never played running back, I think that's important. 500 or more rushing yards, I think, would be a successful season for DK. And I think he's certainly capable of achieving more than that. Guys, that being said, let's jump into another break. On the other side, we'll keep the convo rolling as we talk Gamecocks running backs in this 2023 season. You're tuned in to the Daily Crow.
Muscle Dougie, ho. Muscle Dougie, ho.
Guys are back here on this Thursday, July the 27th, 2023. Again, guys, appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. We're talking South Carolina running backs here on today's show. We'll keep that convo rolling tomorrow. We're going to talk best overall, and then we'll jump right into our conversation with Bryce Coon as that comes up in 12 minutes. Who is the best overall running back on South Carolina's roster and in the 2023 football season? See, I told you when we talked quarterbacks, that one was no duh, right? That was a no-brainer. Of course it's Spencer Rattler. It's not so easy to identify who that player is when you're talking a position like the running back group that has so many question marks. And I think this is one we're going to be split on. I think you're going to have some people that are in the Juju McDowell camp. I think some will be in the DeCarrion Joyner camp, some Mario Anderson, some DJ Braswell, some maybe another player. And I think you can make a case for each one of those guys that I mentioned. But when I look at this room, guys, again, it almost feels like a trick question where it's like the answer is more simple than you think it is. The best overall running back entering the 2023 football season, in my opinion, is the only guy in the room who has actually played running back, and that is Juju McDowell. Thus far in his career, through 2 seasons, 114 carries, 467 yards, and 4 touchdowns in his career. He was a very good player as a freshman, by the way. Really burst on the scene as a true freshman. I don't feel like he really got featured enough last season, and again, I think you can blame a lot of that on Satterfield's offensive scheme and just completely misutilizing him and his skill set. This guy, he's a scat back, man. He's 5'7". He's not made to go between the tackles. He's not made to pound the ball at the middle on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1. He is a guy who is a versatile player, can get outside. You can use him in the passing game. You can use him in the sweep game. You can use him outside the tackles. But if you try to plug a square peg in a round hole, we talked about that many times talking Gamecocks offense, it's just not going to work out. But when I'm identifying this room, and I'm looking at not based off potential, based off of right now, and I know that DeCarrion Joyner is going to be the starter. They believe he can be the best. But if I'm looking right now and I have to identify who's the best running back in this room, only one of them's played running back, guys, at South Carolina. There's only one of them I know that's even somewhat of a known commodity. I know Juju McDowell can score touchdowns at this level. I know Juju McDowell can be productive in that position. Maybe not as an RB1, but as we mentioned before, is there really an RB1 on this roster? I don't know that there is. This is something that's subject to change, as is many things we talk about in the preseason. But right now, as I'm identifying and looking at the roster, I got to go with the guys, that's played running back. I don't have a guarantee that DeCarrion Joyner is going to make the transition to running back and be a productive player there. I don't know that Mario Anderson is going to make the transition from Division II football to the SEC. I don't know for certain that a guy like DJ Braswell is a 4-star guy, all the talent in the world, is he going to make the transition and be productive as a true freshman? And certainly you go down the list of Twitty and Nathan Harris, Wanick, and Bradley Dunn and McCracken. There are no guarantees there. I think it's more of a guarantee that none of them probably even see the field this season. So of those top 4 guys I mentioned, I mean, at least Juju McDowell's played the position. And unfortunately, guys, that's the point you're at in the running back group. We're projecting a lot. There's a lot of reasons for optimism. I get it. This is not an indictment on anybody's skill level that they can't be this or they can't be that. But as I've told you before, when I give grades and I give projections and I talk things like best overall, I'm not talking about, hope's not a strategy. I'm not using fairy tale made up numbers. I'm going off of hard facts. I'm going off of what my eyes tell me. I'm going off of real evidence that supports my opinion. And right now, I don't have the evidence to support that what a Kerryon Joyner could be a 1,000-yard rusher. I haven't seen it. I don't know. It could be true. It very well could be. But there's nothing to back your claim other than you're a diehard Gamecock fan, you love the Kerryon Joyner, and he's put on 15 pounds this offseason. That's all you have. I don't have anything that tells me Mario Anderson's going to be that guy at the SEC level. I know what he did at Division II. I know how good he was there, but I don't know. I'm projecting. DJ Braswell, same thing. A lot of talent. And hey, guess what? Maybe I would have sounded this way going into 2010. I don't know if I would have talking like, well, I don't know about that Marcus Lattimore guy, but the only difference is he was the number 1 running back in the country and he was a 5-star player. So a little bit different situation, but I just don't know with DJ Braswell. I don't know how he's going to factor in. I don't know if he can be that guy. He could be, maybe. Has talent for sure. I'm picking best overall right now. I got to go Juju McDowell. I have to. And that's just the state that the running back group is in. And it's no disrespect when I say that, by the way, to Juju McDowell, but do I think that Juju probably serves better in an RB2 role? Probably so. Do I think Juju's cut out to be an RB1 in the SEC? Probably not. But that's just where you are. That's just where you are. And I think those are the kind of guys you have on this roster right now. A lot of RB2s, a lot of RB3s. They can all be productive for sure. But Dowell Loggins will have to be creative to get that running game going. And the offensive line also must be fixed, must be up to par, which we'll talk more about next week. So I got a little bit off subject there, a little bit off topic. When I look at this running back room, there are capable bodies. There are capable pieces. But when I identify my best overall running back in this group right now, and that's okay. Listen, the beauty's in the banter. We can argue about it because you can realistically make a case for each of these guys. But me personally, I'm not going off of what I hope to be true. I'm going off of what I know to be true. What I know to be true is that Juju McDowell is the only player in the room that has actually played the running back position in any capacity. And for that reason, Juju McDowell is my best overall running back on South Carolina's roster entering the 2023 football season. Guys, we got Bryce Coon upcoming on the other side of the break. We'll go ahead and get one more in. Bryce upcoming. We'll talk South Carolina football, SEC, and much more as well. You're tuned in to the Daily Crow.
Muscle Dougie, ho. Muscle Dougie, ho.
All right, guys, we're back here on this Thursday, July the 27th, 2023. Hope you're all doing well. Again, appreciate y'all tuning in. Electric stuff thus far on the show, and it only continues. Again, we got our Q&A Power Hour upcoming in hour number 3. Leave us your questions, comments, and calls. If you can't call in that third hour, you can leave us a voicemail. Also, you're on YouTube. Continue to flood the questions. Send us a super chat. We'll get to your question quicker, of course. You can support the business, the content, the channel, everything that we do. As I mentioned to you guys before, SEC Media Days was such a rewarding experience, not just because you interact with coaches, with players, but the people you interact with and meet as well. And one of them joins us right here on the airwaves. Bryce Coon of 24/7 Sports. He talks all things LSU Tigers and SEC football. Bryce, what's up, my man? It's good to see you once again. And you were like the first person, I think, I ran into at SEC Media Day. So great to see you once again, my man. What's going on?
Hey, it didn't take long. That's for sure. I think I spotted you right as we walked in the building, man. But no, hope you had a good time in Nashville. Love the content that you guys did, especially the mini vlogs. You gave me some ideas, so I might steal it for some stuff of ours. But hey, enjoyed it, man. And man, college football is almost here. I mean, talking season is just about over. So I think we're all kind of ready to talk about something a little bit different as we get into some game recaps, some previews, predictions, stuff like that.
And Bryce, to your point, I just saw on Twitter and I actually reposted it, but highlights from day one of fall camp for Vanderbilt. And I know it's Vanderbilt, but just seeing college football players in pads, in helmets, getting in practice, you're like, man, we're here. I mean, we made it. Yeah. We made it. Kickoff just around the corner. Fall camp gets going for South Carolina next Friday, I'm sure. When does it get going for LSU? I have to imagine
next Friday as well.
Next Friday.
Yeah, next Friday as well. So a lot of teams are starting next Friday, I think.
Yeah. Everybody gets going. So, and also too, I'm glad to have you on, Bryce, because I'm not sure there's anybody that loves NCAA football simulations and NCAA football content more than me than you, my friend. So I mean, it's a blast. I mean, it's truly we love it. Some of the most fun content that I know I get to make, I'm sure you get to make as well. I don't know if you saw, by the way, Bryce, our last game though, we played Georgia. It was 22-22 with 5 seconds left. Georgia throws a bomb. Carson Beck to Ladd McConkey. They score as time expires for South Carolina to lose.
I watched I think I tuned into the beginning and I watched the end because I was like, holy cow, like South Carolina's winning this game. Yeah. But then I loved it because I think I shot a comment in, like the NCAA cheese of letting the clock run down. You're like, what are they doing? Like they could have run 3 more plays. Yeah. And man, I'll tell you this. I don't know how many of your folks, have played the game, but I have a conversation with our folks on our channel over there. I'm like, I love that game so much. It makes me nervous for what can happen with the new game. Like just, Madden for me is ruined. I don't like Madden. It makes me a little bit nervous, but we'll see.
Well, the good news is for folks like you and I, Bryce, if the new game sucks, I'll just turn the PS3 back on. I don't exactly like, hey, you know what? I'm good to go. College football revamp. Y'all keep it coming. Either way, Bryce, we could sit here and talk digital football all day long. Let's talk some real football. Before we get going there, Bryce, let people know just, I'm sure there's a lot of folks tuned in that aren't familiar with your work, and I'd love to hear as well. So you started out covering Georgia Tech. You're now on the LSU beat. Just give folks an idea, who you are, your journey, and how you got to this point.
Yeah, I'm originally from Columbus, Georgia, which for folks that don't know anything other than Georgia than Atlanta, it's essentially an hour and a half south, right on that Alabama line. We're actually 40 minutes from Auburn. So we grew up around a lot of Auburn fans, and it was a really cool place to grow up because we didn't have, sports radio in Columbus. So it kind of what got me to start my own show, my own podcast called The Crowded Booth. It's a play on words just for the sense of I also do a lot of play-by-play broadcasting. And I actually did a couple South Carolina softball games this past year. So I don't think I told you that. But, yeah, did a couple South Carolina softball games, talented squad they had. But, did that and just said, hey, there's a need. I got some buddies to do it with, and we've got a fun little crew. We do our show, obviously, in the midst of some of these previews we had you on, I guess, now 2 weeks ago, right before SEC Media Days. But, yeah, just kind of fell in love with just talking sports. And like a lot of people – kind of realize that, you can kind of create your own platform with this, just like you've done, with this. And so you don't need especially in the day and age of, being able to have all the tools necessary. I mean, look, I've got a webcam like you probably do, or my Mac, and I hit you up to make sure what little thing you were using for your mic, and you can create your own stuff and create your own content. So we've got a nice little following, and I started off just kind of doing the show, and then was a kind of a freelancer for 24/7 Sports covering Georgia Tech. And I think one of my first stories was the transfer of I guess it's a Marion Brown to South Carolina, and so that one was a tough one for Tech fans. Talented kid in his time there, but did that for 4 years, and then this past January actually moved down to Baton Rouge like 2 months ago. So way different than kind of the Atlanta, Georgia area that I grew up in. But man, we're excited. We're excited to be down here, my wife and I. It's a ton of fun, and I have never taken in a game, and we were talking about this. I've never taken in a game in Death Valley. Everyone keeps saying it's different than anything you've ever been to. Like, I've been to a decent amount of SEC stadiums, but they said it's just different, especially a night game. So, whether it's Florida that comes there, I'm trying to think about A&M that's going to come there this year. It's going to be a ton of fun, man. But just, bottom line, enjoy talking football, enjoy talking college football. You grew up in the South. I mean, I'm a big baseball guy, big Braves fan. You can kind of tell behind me, I got some World Series championships stuff, got a Masters flag, all that kind of stuff, showing off the little Georgia pride. But, I really enjoy just kind of talking sports, and a big reason why we're doing this today.
Well, Bryce, let's definitely talk some football, man. Back to SEC Media Days, and we're definitely going to get into LSU, but I kind of want to do a run around the SEC with you. Your overall takeaways from SEC Media Days. I thought the event was somewhat – I don't know about subdued. I mean, it was my first one. So for me, it was electric. It was electric, right? But the more rewarding side of it was getting to meet folks like yourself, others I had done content with, meeting them in person, meeting new people as well, and connecting. But, admittedly, I did find myself at times being somewhat bored with what some of the head coaches were having to say. Like, it's one of those things, unless you cover that team and you're like really in depth, the nitty gritty. And a lot of the time, I'd say most of the time, Bryce, they're not even talking football. It's all about portal. It's all about NIL. It's all about, the future of college football, which are important things. But like the Lane Kiffin presser, I wanted to rip my hair out. I was like, listen, I know y'all are trying to get a soundbite, and you did. Congratulations. Yeah. But I'd love to hear about Walker Howard and Spencer Sanders and Jackson Dart. I'd love to talk about Quinshon Judkins. I'd love to talk about their defense. So anyways, the storylines, I feel like it was a lack of storylines. Like, it was very subdued, right? I don't think Nick Saban really provided us what we thought we would, like this chip on his shoulder. He's mad at Feinbaum was what we heard going in the week. Kirby Smart answering culture questions. There wasn't really much of that at all. I mean, your overall thoughts, Bryce, just on the week that was, and, what you thought of SEC Media Days as a whole.
Yeah, I've been around media days in general for the past 4 years, kind of actually, I guess, after COVID now. So it was the ACC Media Days the past couple years, and then obviously this is my first SEC one. Over the past couple years, we've had like news break out about, conference realignment, which kind of had an added charge to, and remember, I guess it was 2 years ago when the Texas-Oklahoma news first broke, to join the SEC. Like, we were at ACC Media Days, and the big question, and it continues to be for the ACC, is, what do you do? Like, how do you stay relevant? And so I think the news broke like 20 minutes before the commissioner went up to speak. So there's an electric atmosphere, and he's going to get some questions about this. But I think, for everything for the SEC Media Days, I mean, LSU for our job, they went first, and it was pretty, we talked about this. It was a business-like approach. And that was kind of like my thing. It was very much of, let's go here, let's take care of business. We don't really care what other people think about us. We are going to care what worries happens inside these walls. And so, you get your sound bites, and then I was kind of able to just like take it in just like you did up until South Carolina went. And, I enjoyed the Hugh Freeze. I think that was one that a lot of people were looking for on the Auburn side of things. I had a lot of buddies texting me, from my hometown. We have a lot of Auburn fans, like I said, that grew up in Columbus, Georgia. What are my thoughts on it? I think, from all things considered, I think he handled it well. I mean, look, it's a matter of time before all these question marks about his character and everything. It's college football. If he wins, no one cares. Like, that's just how it is. So, he did that, and I enjoyed listening to him. Kirby kind of got a couple of questions in the breakout sessions, got some. But, those questions for the general population, we'll say, of media, you get some, like you said, that are about the culture and how does NIL affect you? And then some that just like, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Kirby or somebody who said, Northwestern, like, how do you feel about that? Or they asked Brian Kelly, and I'm just sitting there like, how is he supposed to answer this question?
That lady was up front. I think she was with the Associated Press. She was asking every head coach that.
Yeah,
every single one of them.
And so, like, for that, you obviously have an agenda. Like, that's my thing. You obviously have an agenda. You're, like, trying to push with this question. But, like, what do you expect these guys to say? So, you talked about uneventful. Yeah, I mean, you get a couple sound bites. You get, to me, the best thing is you get, like, the one-on-one interviews with the players. Because that's where you're really going to get some information, how's so-and-so looking. Like, that's the kind of questions I asked. I mean, even guys that weren't there. Hey, for LSU, he was my SEC Defensive Player of the Year, Harold Perkins, like a kid that is unbelievable. I was asking Mekhi Wingo, I said, what does he look like in year 2? Like, how much better has he gotten? So stuff like that's cool. But, overall, I would say that there was a little bit of a lack of juice necessarily. Even last year, I don't remember the timeline, Chris, but was it before or after? And it was probably before the Jimbo versus Saban feud.
It was before. That was
a big talking point going into last year. And so there's nothing like that. And then, it's crazy to me because we just got done doing a Georgia football preview with one of my good friends, and he covers Georgia for On 3. And he was talking about just off air, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this. He goes, it's another offseason of everyone's talking about everyone else, but a lot like last year, no one's really talking about Georgia. Like, obviously there's a conversation about the quarterback job, but it's just like, oh yeah, Georgia's going to be good. But like, no one's really going in depth to like schematically what they have. And so, it's just kind of fun stuff that you get these questions that you're just like, really? Like, you stood up on national television and asked that? And I loved your questions. And I'm not just saying this on your show. Like, I mean, the one you asked to Kelly about Logan Diggs, I mean, that's good stuff that not only helps us in our coverage, but it's like, what you said, it's talking ball, it's talking schematics, it's talking how does this guy help your team, not just general questions about NIL that a lot of the coaches are like, it's not my expertise. Like, I don't know, I can't answer that question. Right. So I do agree with you, a little lack of fireworks in that sense, but it is what it is. You get a good time, and I guess Nashville's not a bad place to spend a couple days either.
Not at all. And Bryce, it's funny. I think it confirms though what I think we probably already knew, but maybe weren't saying aloud, is that fans don't care about the off-field stuff, man. They just listen, it's what we have to talk about right now because there's nothing else going on. Yeah. But I mean, to the point of Kirby, and I mean, I'm kind of wired the same way, and I'm absolutely not condoning what's happened in Athens. I mean, 2 people died. They've got to fix the whole street racing culture, like whatever culture stuff they have going on. But at the end of the day, we all just care about football. We all just care about on the field. And especially like these diehard fans of these schools, they don't give a damn. As long as you're winning games, that stuff is a footnote at best. But Bryce, let's talk some football. We'll start in the SEC West. I thought it was, by the way, Bryce, before we get there, are you ready to admit that you were one of the folks that voted for Vanderbilt to win the SEC title?
I had someone text me immediately after that came out, and they were like, who did this? I was like, I have no idea, but it had to be someone who had a little too much to drink on Broadway.
Well, and Bryce, I need to come clean and say I was not the one that voted for South Carolina. I want to make that, because a lot of people would look at me and say it was me. It was not, I can assure you. Anyways, Bryce, looking at the SEC West, I thought this was fascinating because, like you mentioned, Brian Kelly goes first. I agree with you. I thought it was a very business as usual, very confident type of approach. Not like overconfident, but just a very confident bunch. They know they have a good football team. And I figured LSU was going to be the pick in the SEC West. And, for reasons that, number one, I think LSU's loaded. Number two, Alabama has question marks. I mean, you lose Bryce Young, you lose Will Anderson, you lose Jahmyr Gibbs. You have a question mark. They don't know who the quarterback is right now. That's the most important position on the field going into kickoff. And yet the media selects Alabama to win the West. And what that tells me, Bryce, the level of respect and the level of, credit given to Nick Saban and what he does and his legend status, and he is the GOAT, absolutely. It really screams to me the benefit of the doubt that Nick Saban receives, because I think everything on paper says LSU's the pick. I know they have to go to Tuscaloosa, but Bryce, I've picked Bama to lose 3 games. Like, I think that's very possible. I'm assuming, I don't want to assume. Who was your pick in the SEC West, and were you surprised that the media pick was Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, I picked LSU. And, when people asked me about it, I said, hey, look, I've only been on the beat for 6 months, so you can't say I'm a fan. Never been to a game. So, right. I picked LSU, and not for the big reasons that you just stated. I mean, there are question marks. And when you have a guy come in as a transfer, and this was the big telling sign to me, Chris, as much as we've seen the portal, like when you have a guy come in as a transfer and the two incumbent guys don't immediately enter their name, that's a big sign, because that does not scream this guy's the default number one starter. That means a battle's still happening, even bringing this guy in. Now, I know the relationship between OC and Tommy Reese and this young man, but I just, there's too many question marks. But when you spend enough time around the SEC and you see the love for Nick Saban, and look, it's warranted. Like, the guy's done a great job. You cannot as much as it's kind of like the Yankees in the baseball. Like, you hate the Yankees, but you respect like Jeter and all those guys. Like, you respect Nick Saban. I know some Auburn fans don't, and that's fine. But it's one of those things where I wasn't as surprised, because I still think this team has a lot of talent. Like, I think Alabama defensively is going to be solid. I think they're going to get back to having an offensive line that is going to push people around. They didn't have that last year. That hurt them big time last year. Receivers, I don't know if there's a round one guy in that room right now that we know of, we can talk about here in July, but there might be when we get to November and December. It's, you were talking earlier before you had me on. A lot of these things, these questions we have, they could be answered mid-September, mid-October, or it could not be answered at all. So I don't want to say I was too surprised, but I think the fact that LSU has to go there, and, that is a tough place to play. How do they handle the expectations? The biggest question mark for LSU is, how do you handle the expectations of, you're not surprising anybody this year? Like, last year you were, and this year, you're not surprising anybody. So what does that look like? I can't remember how close the vote was, Chris. I mean, I don't think it was too far off.
No.
It seemed like it was, pretty almost dead even with a couple people going to Alabama. But look, I mean, Alabama's going to get the benefit of the doubt until Nick Saban retires. People just have blind faith in him that he could walk out there with a, 4A high school team and somehow figure out how to win 3 or 4 games in the SEC. I mean, that's just who he is.
Mm-hmm. Now, you look at LSU, Bryce, let's stick with them. I think, again, another fascinating topic is, I think, it felt like coming in the week, LSU was the favorite, Bama the chip on the shoulder. And I know they still have it because Georgia's picked to win the SEC. But I left SEC Media Days feeling like, I actually think it's LSU with the chip on the shoulder, because they're the reigning SEC West champs. They're the ones that beat Bama last year, and Bama gets picked to win the West. So, again, thoughts on LSU, year 2 of Brian Kelly. I mean, what they did in year 1 was absolutely incredible. Showed some signs of faltering down the stretch, losing to Texas A&M, looked really sloppy against Arkansas. And, I mean, what Georgia did to them, many teams. They did that to many teams, right? I mean, that's not surprising. But thoughts on LSU? I mean, breaking down this football team a little bit, like we've mentioned, I think Jaden Daniels is primed to take the next step at quarterback. What you have on the outside at receiver with Wingo, I mean, the offensive line, you return basically everybody. I think Diggs at running back solves a lot of questions there. And then defensively, I mean, you get Mason Smith back, who people are literally comparing to like a Jalen Carter, right? Like, he could be that type of guy. And then, oh, by the way, Harold Perkins Jr. is maybe the best defensive player in all of college football. Secondary might have some questions. They went to the portal there, but I mean, not a lot of weaknesses on this LSU squad.
Yeah, you mentioned, the question marks, and I think it does start with that secondary. You brought in, if I'm taking Colorado out of the equation when we talk about transfer portal class because of the amount of numbers they brought in, LSU's got to be up there, and 24/7 Sports has them up there. I think they're number 2 or number 3 in that range. So you brought in a lot of faces, but how do those guys gel on the back end? And you're going to figure out in week 1 when you play Florida State, really kind of in their own backyard down there in Orlando. And, South Carolina fans are familiar, obviously, with Jaheim Bell. That's going to be a matchup nightmare, I think, for LSU. Where do they use that? They've got some big-bodied receivers. You're going to know week 1 how that secondary has gelled during the summer and fall camp. But you mentioned, I mean, there's so many strong suits. Harold Perkins, that guy is going to be a top 10 pick. Like, I mean, unless, God forbid, I'll knock on wood, something happens, this kid just is that he's a freak. He's just that talented. You mentioned Mason Smith, Mekhi Wingo. I think that has a chance to be the best defensive line duo in the SEC if they stay healthy, what they were able to do. Offensively, so Chris, this is where I sit with this. Logan Diggs was a much bigger pickup than I think LSU fans are willing to admit. Because look, one thing I've learned is that when you get a program that has a proud tradition like LSU, they don't like to admit necessarily when, they may have a shortcoming or they may have a roster spot that's not where it needs to be up to par with the rest of the group. A running back was that. You had a lot of faces, but you just didn't have a guy that you feel like could be a 3-down guy, could do some things out of the backfield with the pass, and also run in between the tackles and run some zone stuff outside, I think Diggs fits that mold. He's going to pair up with, obviously, Josh Williams, a great story, a walk-on who really came on down the stretch and had a breakout game against Auburn in LSU's comeback win last year. But it all does hinge on Jane Daniels. And I was talking with one of the guys that covers Florida, and he went to Arizona State, and his senior year was Jaden's freshman year there. And I believe it was his freshman or sophomore year where they upset Oregon. And he threw that long, deep pass. And I went back and watched a little bit of that game. And it was, Arizona State knocks Oregon out of playoff conversation. If he can be consistent down the field, consistently explosive, this team's a playoff contender. And not just a playoff contender, like they might be in the playoff. If he's not, you've got a guy that's capable. Like, I think it's the best. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, because I know you talked about the quarterback room for South Carolina, especially in the SEC West right now. Like, I think it's the most comfortable you are with having to play your backup quarterback, maybe in the SEC and maybe in the SEC as a whole. Like, I don't know how comfortable they are going at South Carolina behind Spencer Rattler and saying there's not a big drop off. But with Garrett Nussmeier, and you mentioned that Georgia LSU game, I mean, it wasn't against the twos. Now, Georgia was playing a little bit, lighter coverage, but the kid can sling it. And he'd probably be starting, and he got some opportunities to go, in the offseason, the portal, and didn't take them. So I'm with you. I think that this team, I think it's going to be a huge season. I think that they have an opportunity to really do some damage. Game one is not make or break against Florida State. It's a tone setter. That's for sure. Because, you can win one game, especially out of conference, and in the SEC still make the playoff and not really sweat it. Like, as long as you win out, you're going to get there. And then you mentioned last year, and I'll kind of wrap it up with this. I mean, faltering down the stretch was something that they talked about, not having the focus they should have when they went on the road to A&M. And there'd have been a good argument, Chris, if they would have beat A&M last year and then somehow upset Georgia. I mean, you could make an argument they should have been the first 2-loss team in the college football playoff. With the wins that they had, winning the SEC, beating a Georgia team that really looked invincible all year, beating Alabama, beating Ole Miss. It would have been an interesting conversation, but I think that Brian Kelly has done a great job in kind of turning this program around, because one thing I've learned is that as much as everyone loved Coach O down here, he really soured in some people's mouths, towards the end of all this. And so it's an upward trajectory. And I think Kelly handles his business well. At first, it was thought as a safe hire, but this is a guy that I think has him on the right track.
Now, Bryce, you look at the rest of the SEC West and Texas A&M, man. I feel like an alcoholic drinking shoe shine. Like, I can't get off of Texas A&M, man. I told myself I'd never pick them to do well again. And I'm like, I look up and I got them at 9-3 and beating Alabama, man. Does Texas A&M, because you look at the roster, man, the way they've recruiting in a top 5 clip every year. Like, that's one of the best rosters in the SEC. So do you think with the addition of Bobby Petrino that Texas A&M figures it out? Not necessarily wins the West, but makes more noise than they have in a while.
Yeah, they're going to be interesting to watch, because what's enough for the flame not to get turned up on Jimbo's seat? I think that if you ask people outside, like if they sit in that 8-4, 9-3 range, you have to take a 30,000-foot view and say that's really good from where they were last year. But because of the expectations, is that good enough? I don't think they're going to win the SEC West. But like you said, this is, to me, not just one of the more talented rosters in the SEC. You look across the country, and the amount of 5 stars these guys have, the amount of just talented guys that they have in certain positions. I mean, that defensive line room, when I was looking at the, to vote for the all SEC teams, I mean, you looked at that and you're like, I was hard pressed not to put almost every single guy they had in that room who could have a big individual season. And so I like the Aggies. I do think that they had some addition by subtraction last year. They had some talent leave, and that's what a lot of people are going to tell you on the surface level. Well, you see what they had leave, but they had to do a little cleansing of the program. And look, LSU is one of the guys that picked up Denver Harris, 5-star corner. They had to do that. So I like the Aggies, Chris. I think that they can get to that 8-9 win threshold, but Petrino is the key. And is Jimbo really hands-off? He gets really defensive about all these type of questions, and it's kind of funny. But I think Petrino's a guy that could elevate them. They got to figure out what they got at quarterback. They got to figure out, consistency in being able to run the football. Because look, I mean, you play in the SEC West, and it's kind of been a running joke for the past decade or so. The SEC West is a different beast, and where you got to go, LSU, Alabama. I mean, look, Auburn is a tough place to play. Ole Miss, Mississippi State. I mean, I know you're more bullish on Mississippi State than a lot of people across the country. We were joking about that. It's not an easy trek. So if they hit that 8 or 9 win threshold, I think he's safe. That's my personal opinion. But like I said, I don't have the Aggie polo on, and I'm not one of those big donors writing that big check.
Yeah, they win 7 or less, Bryce, and I think depending on the price of oil around Thanksgiving, he could be finding his way out. As crazy as the buyout is, hey, $75 million with that oil money, it may not be all that much. What do you make of the rest of the West, man? Ole Miss, Arkansas, Auburn, Mississippi State, 3 through 7. Really, I think you include A&M in there because who knows at this point? Let's not give them the benefit of the doubt. 3 through 7 could finish in any order. Which of those teams do you look at and say, just from a 30,000-foot view and based off what you heard at media days and what you know about them, which of those teams would you say is maybe on the ascent, on the descent? Like, who do you like? Who are you buying stock, selling stock on going into 2023?
Yeah, I'm buying Ole Miss in the sense of Lane Kiffin just makes me nervous. In the sense he's a great offensive mind, and he makes me nervous because you never know what he's going to say. I mean, God bless his PR team. That's a nightmare to be a part of. But he's a great offensive mind. If Jackson Dart, if he's the guy, and he can even have somewhat of a same type of year, any type of same type of year that Matt Corral had in year 2, they're going to be dangerous. Quinshon Judkins might be the best back in the country. I mean, that guy is unbelievable. So they've got pieces, and I trust Lane Kiffin more than any of those other coaches that we talked about in that 3 to 7 range to find a way to be explosive offensively. Defense, a whole nother question. What does Pete Golding do? Does he have the pieces to be able to do it? We'll see. Keep going down that line. Mississippi State, I heard you. I heard you, Chris, and what we were talking about at Media Days up in Nashville. And I don't want to say you changed my mind completely, but I see where you're coming from. Like, Will Rogers is still a really good quarterback. And he, whatever type of scheme they're going to be able to run there and how if it looks the same or whatever, I don't think that the drop-off is going to be as steep as people think it is. Like, I don't think they're going to be like 3 and 9. I mean, this has still got a lot of talent on this roster. I love Jaquavius Marks as well. We got to hear from him. He was great. So I like where they are. And how can you not root for Zach Arnett? Like, Mississippi State is going to be a team that if you're a fan of other team and you got to play them and you beat them, you're going to kind of feel bad about it. Like, you're going to be like, I'm glad we won, but gosh, I hate that we had to do that to them. So I like them. The biggest wild card for me, though, is going to be Auburn. I mean, Arkansas's there, Sam Pittman, KJ Jefferson. That's great. I still think that they're a middle of the road SEC to bottom half SEC team. I'm interested in Auburn, Chris, because I've been around the Auburn program enough to know it can be a really special place. If you get that place rocking, much like a Willie B. I mean, if on a Saturday night, there's not a better environment in college football when places like that are rocking. If Hugh Freeze can navigate the non-conference schedule and dominate, I mean, they open up with some really weak competition. If he can do that and get some momentum heading into where they play LSU and they play Georgia, whether they win or lose those games, like if you can make Jordan Hare a house of horrors again and have a great defense, you can do a lot. But they, too, brought in so much of the portal. One of the big talking points has been, well, they essentially brought in a whole new offense. Okay, that could be great. But also that means you've got about 10 to 11 guys that have never played together. And so what does that look like? I like Peyton Thorne. I love Robbie Ashford. I think Freeze is the guy for the job. I just don't know where they sit. I'm higher on them. I think that they can go 6-6, 7-5, and I think that's perfect. Like year one of what he had to take over, Harsin was a nightmare. So this SEC West race is going to be interesting. And of course, Chris, everything we say here could be thrown out the window by like September the 30th. I mean, we could be talking about something completely different, but it's going to be a fun year to watch that side, for the final time, kind of, jockey and beat each other up.
And Bryce, to your point about Auburn and they were my team. I was stock up, stock down. I was stock down on Auburn, not from the sense of that, I think they're going to be a 6-6 or 7-5 team, but a lot of their fans are saying, we're going to win 8, we're going to win 9, surprise. Yeah, and I think Hugh Freeze, you very much so heard him at the podium say, we are asking for patience. He mentioned, I've never come into a season with this many question marks. That was a coach to me that was almost, again, pleading with the Auburn fan base, like, hey, we're kicking ass in recruiting, we're kicking ass in the portal, but we're not Georgia yet, and we're not Bama, and don't expect us to be, which is a fair expectation. But, when you're in Auburn, they're kind of known for the expectations getting a little out of control. Let's move, Bryce, to the SEC East. Georgia, obviously, is the creme de la creme. They are the pick in the East. They're the pick to win the SEC. If they don't win the SEC, what went wrong for them? And then what do you like about this Georgia team going into the year?
Man, you caught me at a perfect time. We just released our Georgia preview this morning, so I'll kind of copy what our guest Palmer Toms of Dogs HQ and On 3 said. If Georgia doesn't win the SEC, it's because the new quarterbacks failed miserably. I mean, you're talking about guys that haven't really taken huge, meaningful snaps, and all the upside, the stuff that you're hearing out of camp, spring ball, it looks great in shorts and a T-shirt, but it just doesn't translate. So, that would have to be something that happens to me. And then another thing, I think the defense is going to be really good. Like, Chris, the front seven, I was looking at their depth chart yesterday, kind of prepping and looking at the roster. They've got like 4 guys with 3+ years of experience playing on the defensive line and kind of in that outside linebacker position. I mean, they've got guys that have played a lot of ball, but just haven't been the notorious names because of the guys they've had the past 2 years. I mean, go look at the Eagles roster. That's essentially the guys that have been, playing so well. So I think Georgia, it's a leadership thing. They lost, and this was a great quote from our show. They lost Christopher Smith, that was an All-American safety, kind of a guy, the quarterback of the defense. They lost Nolan Smith in the sense of you lost him during the season last year in that Florida game, but you don't have his presence in the locker room. So who steps up as kind of, if I'm a Georgia player, who steps up as, I know what Kirby expects. I know what, these guys expect out of be a Georgia football player. That would be the biggest thing if that doesn't rise to the occasion. Now, look, you're talking about a program that kind of feels like a well-oiled machine. I'm not saying those two things are likely, but, obviously you could throw the injury bug in there. But, man, you just look at that schedule. I don't see them losing the game. I mean, at Tennessee is going to be the equivalent of what Alabama going there last year was in the type of atmosphere. You mentioned, Ole Miss comes to Sanford Stadium in November, but you're going to kind of know who you are by then. And, I tell people all the time, if you feel like you're playing a team with some question marks, you want to play them in like the first 3 or 4 games. You don't want to play them in November because either they're already kind of beaten down and you're going to beat them, or they've, found themselves midway through the year and are playing really good football. So those are kind of a couple things I think. If Georgia doesn't win, it's going to come down to, the ultimate fail at the quarterback position, the injury bug, and then maybe just a lack of leadership defensively. I don't expect those things to happen, but I think that's what it would take.
I'm right there with you, Bryce. They're my SEC champion. I've got them going undefeated. The only 2 games that really gave me pause when I looked at their schedule was, I think, at Auburn could be tricky. You never know.
True.
Jordan Hare, weird things happen. And then that game you mentioned against Tennessee. But I think Georgia takes care of business. Until I see differently, man, they're the back-to-back national champions. Like, put some respect on their freaking name.
Yeah.
The SEC East, Bryce, is really similar to the West in the sense 2 through 6, could literally just go any way. I'm confident putting Vandy 7, but if you want any indication that the SEC East after Georgia's wide open, any year you go into where, I think you can make a case that Vanderbilt won't finish last. There are things you could point to. That could be Florida, that could be Missouri, but, talk about the SEC East. We'll get to South Carolina in just a second because I want to hear your perspective on the program. But when you look at the East, one of the big questions, is Tennessee the 4th best team in the SEC with Joe Milton, right? They got a lot to replace, but Josh Heupel's built sort of that reputation of them being electric offensively, and it sounds like they've taken steps forward defensively. There's pressure on Billy Napier in year 2. There's pressure on Eli Drinkwitz to get it rolling. And then, of course, there's South Carolina. Also, let's not forget Mark Stoops in Kentucky and what they added in the portal. I tell you, Bryce, stock up, stock down. They're my stock up team. When you really look and you go down the list, and especially offensively what they added, Devin Leary at quarterback, Liam Cohen's back at OC, best group of wide receivers they've had in his tenure there. They added 2 guys in the offensive line of the portal from Southern Cal and Bama. They added Ray Davis. They added Demi Sumo, both at running back. I think Kentucky's a team. If that O-line holds together, they could be solid as well. So how do you make sense of the SEC East after Georgia?
So I'm going to start from the bottom, and I'll reveal my ballot. I had Florida last. Chris, I don't think that they have the talent, that we're used to. You've been in the SEC East. I mean, I'll surprise people here. I grew up a Georgia fan growing up in the state. I'll just go ahead and tell people that. Tech fans can't stand that, and I see someone down in the comments has alluded to me being a parental figure for them. But it's it's one of those things where I've watched enough of the SEC East. In the back of your mind, Florida has been one of those programs where you're like, yeah, they may not be good, but they're good for 7 or 8 wins a year. I mean, I don't think that you can say that confidently this year. Like, their quarterback situation. I mean, look, we all make jokes about the spring game, but like Napier has been kind of upfront about it. I don't think they love where they are. And I think a big thing is you can see how much they're pouring into the recruiting cycle of 2024. That is kind of where they're putting their eggs in the basket. I think if you're Napier, you just got to kind of hope to stay above that 5-win mark. If you can get to 5 wins, you're not going to get fired because you got this class coming in. They're at least going to give you another year, maybe 2. So I've got Florida last. I really like Clark Lee. I mean, who doesn't? It's another program that you want to do well. I think that they showed last year that that's a place where you either have to have a guy like James Franklin, who was a great coach, and I think Lee's a good coach, or a guy that can really get a lot out of not too much. And I think that's what Clark Lee showed us last year. I love A.J. Swan, the young quarterback they got. He's a dynamic playmaker, probably one of the better quarterbacks they've had in the recent 5-6 years. So I've got them kind of sitting in that, 6th spot. After that, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think I went from bottom to top. I went Florida 7th, Vanderbilt 6th. I went Missouri. And then we can talk about Missouri. Drinkwich, is he going to have a job after this year? I don't know. But just for the time's sake, when you kind of get to the next 3, and I'll say the 3 under Georgia, anything can happen. I agree with you. Tennessee's got a lot to replace. But can South Carolina go there and beat them? That's my question. We're going to obviously know, more about that. Can the Gamecocks go there and beat them? And then I'm like you. I think I remember now. I went Georgia from top to bottom. Georgia, Kentucky. I think Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina. That's
Kentucky is your 2. Kentucky is your 2.
I'm high on Kentucky in the sense of I like Devin Leary, having been around the ACC, watched what he can do, Chris, when he's upright.
Bryce, to your point, people forget how good he was at NC State. I mean, there was a Devin Leary for a Heisman campaign going into last year.
I was I'm pretty sure I was one of the tweets that said, and like you said right before I hopped on, we're not trying to get into propaganda. We're going straight off the facts of the stats. And when you compared his stats in the 2021 season to other guys that were up near the tops, of the quarterback rankings, there was a real case to say, why can't he do it? Like, why can't he be a part of this conversation? Because I'll tell you, if he was playing for more of a name brand program, he would have gotten that recognition in 2021. So I like Leary. You mentioned the receiver room. It's the most talented they've had. Stoops is a good coach. Like, I know that South Carolina fans loved going in there and beating them last year. And, there's the rivalry and all that kind of stuff, the banter back and forth. He's got that program at a spot where he could really just ride this thing out until he either wants to retire or do whatever he wants. I mean, if they're good for at least a basement level of 7 wins a year, you can have the Kentucky job for your entire life. So I like Leary. I like the additions they made. I don't think they can go into Athens and beat Georgia, but do I think they could beat Tennessee? If you told me they were playing tomorrow night, I think so. Could they beat South Carolina? Chris, you tell me, and we can go into the South Carolina conversation.
Very much so. It's very much so a swing game. I think it's a swing. I agree. To call it anything else, I think is just you've either got garnet and black glasses on or you don't know ball. Bottom line, it's a swing game, as is the South Carolina Missouri game. That's how Bryce. That's how I look at I would say 3 through 7 in the West and 2 through 6 in the SEC East. That these are all 50-50 games, man. These are all teams that you can look at and say, here are 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why they'll go 5-7 or 6-6. Here are 3 or 4 or 5 reasons they'll go 9-3 or, God forbid, better. Like I think, and that's what happens when you get, you're not an elite like a Georgia, an LSU, and Alabama, where you have a lot of answers to your question marks. There are so many question marks on your football team where it's like, I always phrase it this way, Bryce. Some things will work out better than you expect. Some things will work out not as you expect. Some things will be right as you expect. It's somewhere in the middle. So, but which team has more of those question marks work out in their favor? And so, no, I think, listen, it's very, very fair to, and Gamecock fans, I mean, I'm as honest as you'll hear talk about it. They hate to hear me talk about the Kentucky football program, hate to hear me talk about Mizzou, because it's like, Kentucky at one point was looked down upon by South Carolina. It still probably kind of is. But for me personally, Kentucky was a game you could throw in the win bucket just like Vandy. I mean, you know it as well as I do. You're an SEC East guy. That's not Kentucky football anymore, man. They're just not. Like, they're on the same level as you. Yeah. Missouri, who Gamecock fans 100% look down on. Bryce, I saw a tweet during SEC Media Days week that said, and it was from a Gamecock fan, random guy, whatever, said, I don't care if Missouri beats us every year. They're not better than us. And I'm like, who's going to tell him that's not how football works? That's just not how football works. So
I'm like, no, what you're basing your argument off of?
You're much more on equal footing with Mizzou as well. So, yeah. I mean, I look at those, again, back to your point. Kentucky, I think, absolutely is a 50-50 swing game. And, one certainly that you like South Carolina's chances late in the season at home, but let's call it for what it is last year too, man. I mean, not having to face Will Levis, not having to face a 100% Kentucky team. Hey, that was an advantage for Carolina. Now, it's not something you should apologize for, because the Gamecocks were playing, a graduate assistant at quarterback back in 2021, and nobody gave them sympathy. But yes, absolutely, Bryce. I would label that a swing game.
Yeah. Look, and just to kind of talk about South Carolina, if that's where you want to go with it.
That leads us. That's a great segue into your perception or perspective of the South Carolina program right now. Shane Beamer overachieved in his first 2 years. They've done fantastic things. Year 3 is very interesting. The over-under, Vegas still doesn't believe, right? Over-under 6.5. The computers hate South Carolina. Projected to win 5.5 games, 5.7, whatever FPI, Kelly Ford you want to look at. And the Gamecocks continue to find ways to win, despite, Bryce, let me give you some perspective even more so. Despite 2 years in a row leading the SEC in turnovers, and 2 years in a row finishing outside of the top 100 in rushing offense and rushing defense. My question, Bryce, can South Carolina win despite that for a third straight season? I just think at some point, be careful. Just be careful. I'm warning you. Be careful. I know we love I love Beamer ball to the moon.
Yeah.
And at some point, having to rely on special teams and being opportunistic defensively and overcoming shooting yourself in the foot, at some point, it's going to bite you.
Yeah. I'll say this, you want the opportunities, the turnovers, you want those to be a luxury, not a necessity. Because when you're a team that can play solid defensively, and we can joke about it, maybe Jimmy Lindsey leaving, and from what I can tell from South Carolina fans, was a welcome sight, LSU fans.
Blake Ruffino on AYS Sports, I know you're familiar with Blake's work. He asked me straight up, and I said, man, do you want the honest answer, or do you want the answer you think LSU fans want to hear? He said, no, I'll be honest. I said, hey, when Jimmy Lindsey left, I said, don't let the door hit him on the way out. I was more than happy to see Jimmy Lindsey depart. Maybe it's a Jimmy's and Joe's issue, and we'll find out this year, but
true.
They couldn't stop a nosebleed in his 2 years as D-line coach.
So to kind of go back to that, I mean, like I was saying, you want opportunities on special teams and turnovers to be that luxury, because if you're relying on it, I agree with you. You're playing with fire, and eventually you're going to get burnt. Like, it's only going to be a matter of time before someone comes in that's bigger and badder than you. And let's just call it for what it is. It worked against Clemson. It worked against, Tennessee, and they played well. I don't want to not give, South Carolina credit. You had to play well. You don't just luck into beating teams like that. But you saw when you don't capitalize on those things and you're the one making this mistake, what happened against Georgia happens. Like, when you play elite teams and you don't dictate errors, you commit them, man, it's going to be a long day at the office. And so, I think that when I look at South Carolina from an outside perspective, first off, I think Shane Beamer was I think he was, the best hire possible when you look back 2 years ago. For what they needed, I don't, and Chris, you would know better during that coaching search. I don't know what the finalists were. I don't remember. But, man, looking back on it, I think as a South Carolina fan, you can say, and I've got, like I've told you, I've got some friends that are South Carolina fans. You could say that this is what needed to happen. Now, here in year 3, I think you got to kind of take the glasses off, and me being on the show, is going to be interesting, because I asked your fan base, take the glasses off and just be a college football fan for a second. When you look at this schedule, what do you expect? Like, I'm looking right now, North Carolina. I think it is along the lines of like the LSU Florida State game. It is not a make or break football game. It's a tone setter, and you're going to know, right there from the get go. You play Furman, you go Georgia, you go to Mississippi State. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to kind of watch, where they go with this. But when you look at this and you have the reality of you're in the SEC, you're not at the spot with your roster where you can go toe-to-toe with Bama, LSU, and Georgia. And like you mentioned, you've already said this, Chris, all these games against kind of the middle of the pack, they're swing games. So what takes you to that next step? And I think Beamer can get there. I think he's done a great job recruiting. I think that, he's making South Carolina fun again. We'll say that. He's making it a fun place to be. And we talked about that on my preview show with you as well. I think that they are in a good spot. I just caution, Chris, and I'll throw it back on you. It's your podcast. I'll throw it back on you here.
Now, hey, I want to hear your thoughts. I love, listen, you know this already. You're not going to hurt my feelings, though. I'm as an unbiased, a diehard fan as you'll find. So I run towards the realism and the realistic takes versus the I don't want you to tell me what I want to hear. That's why, again, I feel like a lot of people within the fan base, there's too many out there that will tell them what they want to hear and versus here's what's real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You go speak freely, my friend. You are in a place where that is welcome.
So I watched your show with Mark Ryan before I had you on, and y'all talked about the predictions. You both got to the same result, different paths to get there. But this is what I asked, and I asked the fan base this too, who's watching and will watch this later or listen or whatever. If South Carolina goes 7-5 this year, is this how much of the fan base is going to feel like the sky's falling? How much of it is going to feel like that? Because there is a broad spectrum of the national media. I would say myself included. If South Carolina goes 7-5 again, I don't feel like they've taken a step back personally. I think that they are right where they're supposed to be. When you talk about, where they are necessarily in the arms race of college football, when you talk about the grand scheme of where South Carolina's place is as a college football program, 7-5 this year is not a step back. Now, look, I get it. No one wants to go 7-5. You'd love to go 12-0, 15-0 every single year. But I guess that's my question to you, Chris. I mean, you said it. You've had your predictions. I've seen some of the followers say, what they want as well. But unless this team goes, 5-7 or 4-8, I think anything about 5-7, you say, you know what? Okay. I mean, 6-6 is not what you want to go, but it's not the end of the world, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that Beamer is a bad head coach either.
I would categorize it this way, Bryce, just to give you my perspective. I think 8-4 is the goal, matching last year's win total, and I think that's a successful season. 9-3 or above, bro, build a statue of Shane Beamer. It's just straight up. Yeah, he should be seriously, though, he should be in the running for Coach of the Year. He won't get it because probably Kirby gets it, but that would be an incredible season. I agree with you, 7-5. While maybe you're not hitting the goal of 8-4, I think that's a solid campaign. And it depends on how things go. Hey, you go 7-5 and 4 of those 5 losses are by a touchdown and you're hanging tough with some of those top-tier teams. Well, that's a good season. You made steps forward. 6-6, I think is a disappointment. I think it's a disappointment. I would say, like you said, you don't want to be, jumping for joy at 6-6. 5-7 or worse is a failure. But to your point, Bryce, I said this today that Shane Beamer was hired. I looked at it this way. First 5 years of Shane Beamer, and I understand that everything's been accelerated because of the portal, but first 5 years of Beamer, just make bowl games. Make bowl games and recruit your ass off. That's your only job. Winning, whatever, whether you win 6, 7, 8, or 9, you're not going to win the SEC in the first 5 years. Who cares? Just win as many as you can and recruit your tail off because that's your number one priority and job is to overhaul the roster and revamp this thing and get it to where it needs to be. So to your point, if you win 7 versus 8, it's not like we can say, well, 8's a massive success, but 7's a big step back. I don't think we can say that, especially to your point, if you're making more progress in games like the Georgia game where, bro, it was 48-7. That game could have been 68-7. I mean, Stetson Bennett was taking selfies with the crowd with 10 minutes left. Arkansas wasn't nowhere near as close as the score indicated. They bullied you. They pushed you around, losing 38-6 to Florida. Losing, 23-10 or something to Missouri and just flat out laying an egg. If you can eliminate that in such the wide range of results, and go 7-5, well, then I think you had a successful season. So it's all about building the program right now. I mean, listen, you got people out there that are going to pick 9-3, 10-2, 11-1. Those are your fans, and God bless them. They're going to pick that every single year. And then there's going to be some people out there saying 4-8, 5-7. Those are going to be your doom and gloomers. They're going to be there every single year. As you know, Bryce, we try to be in the middle here. And I think South Carolina, I've picked 7-5. I think they're going to be a lot of what they were last year, just inconsistent. I mean, which goes for a lot of teams in the SEC. Like when you've got holes in certain places and question marks in certain places, there are going to be certain matchups that they don't favor you. Like Mizzou is one, Kentucky is one, where those teams over the years have built up the trenches and South Carolina fell behind. And well, why does Carolina keep losing to Mizzou and getting beat like a rented mule? It's because they don't have the bodies up front that Mizzou has had. I mean, that's been the biggest issue. And that's all it takes. That's all that's why Georgia wrecked South Carolina, because it's a total mismatch in the trenches. But again, 7-5 is where I'm at. 7-5 is my prediction. Bryce, you've been an incredible guest. Last thing before I get you out of here, you mentioned again, you're giving a very non-biased, objective view, which I love. Your non-biased, objective view, how do you view Spencer Rattler? Because we saw him at the end of last year. He was fantastic. First 10 games, he was abysmal. What do you make of him going in this year?
I think that, the best way to put it is, I would say, buckle up, because are you ready to ride the Spencer Rattler roller coaster? I mean, that's just my opinion. Now, hopefully they don't run the offense that you put out there, the playbook against North Carolina, because that would be abysmal. What was he, like 28 yards passing? It was awful.
20 yards passing. Yeah, we scrapped. See, listen, I made the joke, and some Gamecock fans are going to hate me after I say this, but unlike Shane Beamer, it didn't take 10 games for me to fire the offensive coordinator. I did it after 1 week. So
there you go.
All in good fun. All in good fun. Please don't block me.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're going to have performances where you see Spencer Rattler and you go, that's a first-round pick. Like, you're going to have plays. That's a day one guy. And then you're going to have some, and you're going to be like, this guy might not get drafted. And I just think that's where he is at in his career right now. Look, I'd love to be proven wrong. I think that this kid has immense talent. You and I talked about it on my show. I think he's grown up. I watched his interview. I watched some of the stuff from Media Days, and I've watched some interviews he's done on different podcasts and everything like that. And I think that you can grow to respect the fact that he has learned from his mistakes personally. Like he understands where he is. And I think coming to South Carolina, no knock against the program, was a humbling experience for him. It was, because when you're riding that mountaintop and you're at a program that has had guys that have, been, great players at Oklahoma. I mean, the reason he went to Oklahoma is they had great quarterbacks. I like Spencer Rattler. I hope that he has a good season. I just don't know. I need to see consistency. That's for me. If he is consistent on the field, South Carolina could hit 9 wins. I mean, the kid has the talent and the God-given ability to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country. I'm not denying that. It's just, can he put it together for a consistent basis over a season? Because if he does, there's few guys, and I'll say this, and this might excite the fan base a little bit, and we'll leave it at that. There's few guys in the country, Chris, that can elevate their team well above what they should be performing. And I think Rattler has that potential. If he's consistent, he's a guy that can elevate you well beyond the expectations and maybe what you're really, truly capable of. LSU, South Carolina still has some talent, but, Rattler, to me, he's got to show consistency, and I think game one's going to be really fun to watch, because if he comes out and that offense is clicking, buckle up, because that game in Sanford Stadium is going to be fun to watch. Like, I think that's where your hope is. The game against Mississippi State, the game against Tennessee. If he gets the ball rolling early in the season against North Carolina, comes back with, maybe 2 quarters of blowout action against Furman, it's going to set the stage for a fun matchup on September the 16th.
Bryce Coon of 24/7 Sports. Bryce, first thing, it was a pleasure to go on your show. I appreciate you returning the favor. Let's definitely do it more often. Let folks know where they can check out your work.
Yeah, at Bryce_Coon on Twitter. And you can check us out at The Crowded Booth. We talk college football. We talk everything. I know South Carolina's got some Braves fans. We talk about the Atlanta Braves as well. It's a lot of fun. We're on the radio throughout the state of Georgia as well. A couple radio stations you can find over on our website, thecrowdedbooth.com. But Chris, man, I appreciate it. It's been a ton of fun. It was good to meet you, make this connection. And, it might not have been eventful, but hey, we got this out of it. And that's all that really matters.
Bryce, chop on. That'll be my final words to you. I appreciate you taking the time, man. We'll do it again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, man. Take care. Great stuff, guys. Bryce Coon, 24/7 Sports. That was awesome. And I saw somebody comment, and, I'd have to talk to Bryce about it, but That's weekly guest potential. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Guys, we'll jump into a quick break. On the other side, we're going to dive into our Q&A Power Hour. I want to hear from you, your questions, your comments, your calls, and more here on this Thursday. You're tuned in to the Daily Crow. Night.
Marshall Dougie, ho. Marshall Dougie, ho.
All right, guys, we're back here on this Thursday, July the 27th, 2023. Again, I want to say thank you to Bryce Coon for taking the time to chat here on today's show. That being said, we're going to jump right into our Q&A Power Hour. And again, guys, I do apologize our guest cutting into the Power Hour, but when you have as great a conversation as we just have with Bryce, it's well worth it. That being said, let's jump into, we actually had a voicemail come over the break that we will lead off the Power Hour with. Oh. Probably would help if I turned up the volume on our phone lines. There we go. Okay, now we will get into the voicemail that was left over the break.
I've been a fan and listening for a few years. Starting back in 2019, I was drinking with a cousin and decided to jump off a roof and rolled my ankle real bad the day before we were going to Athens for the Georgia game. And I decided to not go to the ER till after the game. So I went to Athens, and I was walking all up and down those hills. But it was well worth it because we all know what happened. But listen, I listen every fall and listen to all the podcasts. But just recently I started listening every day to the Daily Crow. And yesterday I know you were talking about how the university has essentially tried to put you out of business. And like I said, I haven't kept up very frequently over the past few years. But, I've noticed a bit of a shift in the show, and you're talking about switching over to covering more broad SEC categories. But I was just curious, man, and I don't want to take it back to that. I know we got a little off track yesterday, but I was just curious, what was going on with that and what exactly happened with the school? Because I know that last year, Beamer was happy calling out the Beamer Bowl rags, and it seemed like everything was going well. But proud to see the success you're doing, and if I ever see you walking down the streets in Greenville, I'll definitely shout you out again, man. Have a good day. Go Cox.
Okay, so that was Sean. And a great question for Sean. And let me say this, Sean, by the way. I'm not going to get into details of specifics of things that have happened behind closed doors. I will say this. The support from Shane Beamer, those in the building, you are absolutely correct. It is there. The support from Gamecock fans, it is there. There have just been things that have happened. It's been a long 6 years, right? But it's flown by as well. But there have been things over the course of that 6 years that South Carolina has done, whether public or private, and both have happened, that have indicated to me that South Carolina would rather me not exist. Now, again, that is not for everyone because, again, the good news is this. I talked with Shane Beamer back in summer of 2021. I have DM'd him back and forth pretty recently, actually, and we have a great relationship. I talk to other coaches on the staff currently. We have a great relationship. Those guys keep up what we do. They follow the content. They enjoy the content, actually, believe it or not. I think at times it probably serves them with some motivation, some inspiration, right? It's like you're not just surrounding yourself with yes men and people tell us how great we are. Like, getting that kick in the ass can serve as a positive thing. I'm not saying South Carolina uses our content as like motivation, but I think those guys, at least they respect the hustle and they understand where we are coming from as an entity and talking about it objectively and not just blowing sunshine and rainbows. So again, Sean, I don't want to over exaggerate and say that it's me versus South Carolina because it's absolutely not. But, Sean, your question brings me into something I wanted to discuss because I think it's fascinating. I don't spend a lot of time, and I'm going to get into your questions, I promise, guys. I don't spend a lot of time talking about NIL, the NIL space, because I really don't believe the common fan wants to just sit there and talk about NIL every single day and get it beat in their head. Like, we understand the realities of college football, what it is right now, and we do things privately in the NIL space to make a positive impact for the University of South Carolina. But in case you missed it today, it was announced that Garnet Trust, the NIL collective that is essentially what would you say, a part of Gamecock Central or a branch of Gamecock Central or whatever. It's just the other NIL entity. Right now there are three. There is Garnet Trust, there is Carolina Rise, which of course our friend JC Sherbert heads, and there is Park Avenue, which is valuable to USC, but of course there were some obstacles to overcome early in the history of Park Avenue. Well, Garnet Trust is officially now, South Carolina announced a paid partnership with Garnet Trust, an NIL collective similar to Carolina Rise. Garnet Trust will now be the official NIL partner of the University of South Carolina Athletics Department. Our friend J.C. Sherbert put out a statement after that announcement. And I texted JC this morning and had some conversation with him. He says, "Dear Gamecock fans," and it's a long letter. I'm just going to highlight what I think are the highlights of this. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate Jeremy Smith and his group at Garnet Trust for securing what should be a beneficial advertising and marketing partnership for their organization, as well as South Carolina's big picture NIL aspirations. I've said this from the start. This is not a competition. The two collectives grew out of two very competitive media outlets, but it's ultimately a separate business. The more money for South Carolina, the better. And certainly, as many of you have talked about, it helps when the athletics department and university puts its marketing muscle behind it. This is where it gets interesting to me. This is a business transaction between IMG and Learfield, the media rights holder at USC and Garnet Trust. It's a paid endorsement. I wanted to clarify that because I did not want you folks that joined Carolina Rise and only Carolina Rise to think in some way that USC was picking sides here, had a preference. You get what you pay for. And Garnet Trust paid for the right to be called the official NIL partners of South Carolina athletics. That's the bottom line. That's right there in the excerpt. That's right there in the note. It's not like the University of South Carolina is telling folks not to join up with Carolina Rise or that they're not recognizing us or what we do either. We're still listed on the collectives page on the official website. Trust me, USC in no way, shape, or form wants Carolina Rise to go away. They are promoting one over the other because that's their job given the contract USC has with Learfield. But reading that led me back to this point. It's something I've felt for a while, but I feel like seeing something like this really gives an opportunity to speak on it. There is a lot of divide in the Gamecock fan base. There's a lot of divide in Gamecock Nation. There is a lot of divide in the Gamecock community. And guys, we've heard this over the years. South Carolina's biggest enemy is itself. South Carolina will not reach its full potential until at least some of that divide goes away. Because what I see is a lot of ego. I see a lot of ego, and I'm speaking beyond the collectives, but we could certainly, I think this speaks to the divide that I'm talking about. If the ultimate goal is to make sure student athletes at the University of South Carolina are compensated well for their name, their image, and likeness. If the ultimate goal is to make South Carolina as appealing a destination for name, image, and likeness, how does it benefit the University of South Carolina? How does it benefit those efforts to have one entity going this way, one entity going this way, and one entity going this way? How does it benefit them in any way? Also, too, I could just take this back, guys, to personally. It has always blown my mind from the jump how much divisiveness there is in this fan base. When there are folks out there that are really talented, that have potential, they have ability, but they're so driven by ego and spite and negative emotion that they'd rather fail on their own than succeed partnering with someone else. They'd rather do 10% of what they're capable of achieving than putting heads together, shaking hands in a business partnership, and making serious waves and serious traction. Until that divisiveness goes away, whether it's at the collective level, whether it's at the, dare I say, University of South Carolina and TSUS level. Guys, there are so many things going on in the Gamecock community that we have no part of. And I'm most certainly not going to butt TSUS into that. And listen, they don't need us. They don't need us to promote it. I get it. But do you actually think that it wouldn't be beneficial with a network of 38.1 thousand on Twitter, 29,000 on Instagram, 42,000 on Facebook, 19,000 on TikTok, over 50,000 monthly podcast downloads? Do you actually think it wouldn't help the efforts? But there are some that are so driven by ego, the ego of being right, the ego of, I disagree with what that person says, so to hell with them. They cut their nose off, spite their face. I mean, the University of South Carolina has been doing it to me from the jump. Because if you want to make traction with me, I mean, we could have partnered up. We could have done some things. That ship has long sailed, though, I can assure you. But it's always blown my mind, this divisiveness in Gamecock Nation. And there is a serious divisiveness. Heck, I've thought myself, seeing like content creators on social media, like these content guys that are small. They're small entities you probably never heard of. There's some of them out there that are really talented people. They'd rather lead with hate and negativity and jump in with the CSC, the Carolina Slapdick community, if you're not familiar. They'd rather jump in with those people and be cool with the Twitter community than actually do something and build their career and build their following and build themselves as a figure in the Gamecock community. Instead, they'd rather lead with hate. Excuse me. And then again, you look at this collective thing. I mean, how is South Carolina supposed to get out of the cellar, which is where the Gamecocks are, by the way, in case you missed it? How is South Carolina supposed to get out of the cellar in regards to NIL when they're going 3 different directions, if not more? And I know everyone's doing their own thing to, they're doing different types of strategic partnerships with different players, but like, would it not be more effective if all those energies were put together and done for the greater good? Would it not be more productive? I just, and this is America, right? People can start their own businesses. That's great. On one hand, it's like, thank goodness that people have the freedom to start their own collective. But I just don't understand the divisiveness. And I just don't think the University of South Carolina, I don't think anything with Carolina, especially Gamecocks football, you're not going to get the most out of the program until there's a union of some sort. Because all I've seen, as I've dove into content, business has grown, you meet more people, you talk to more people. And you guys know I've spoke to it very, very transparently. There's just such a divisiveness right now. There's such a divisiveness. It's so much of a dick measuring contest with so many different people. I don't think South Carolina, it's not benefiting South Carolina. And I just don't think the Gamecocks, I don't think you're going to get the most, especially out of the NIL scope. As long as there's divisiveness, I just don't think you're not going to see South Carolina reach its true potential. So that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't pretend to be the most well-versed in that space, but I've just noticed it since the jump. There's such a divide in this fan base. There's such a divide. And unfortunately, some of the most divisiveness comes from some people out there that tout they care about this school the most. Just because they don't like that I said the offensive line's not very good. They don't like that I said, well, this player's not all that great. That divisiveness has to go away for South Carolina, I think, to ever achieve anything of significance. So just my opinion. I could be totally wrong, but it's weird. There is divisiveness top to bottom. There's divisiveness top to bottom. So, and Jacob E says teams with the deepest pockets outright buying players, also tampering. And Jacob, guess what? It's the new age of college football. And either, hey, if you broke, just say that. That's really what it comes down to, Jacob. Ain't nobody going to have sympathy for you because Carolina's not the only one losing players. And as I've said before, I don't put it on it's not the responsibility of the common fan to funnel or support a salary cap at your favorite school. My only point is just these collectives being divided, and I think J.C. Sherbert's words were very strong that they're the partner of the University of South Carolina because they're paying to be so. And this is Garnet Trust wanting to one-up Carolina Rise. And I'm not trying to put words in their mouth. It may not be, but they're paying to be in that position. Why is that? Well, because it's business and it is a competition. You can say it's a nonprofit all you want, but it's a business. It's a business, bottom line. Why would Garnet Trust try to get ahead? It's business. It's competition. They want to be the go-to entity. They want to be, this is where you go for NIL. You can say all you want, they're not in competition. That's bullshit. That's complete bullshit. That's complete bullshit. I don't think there's a whole lot of love between those Gamecock Central and those Big Spur guys. And again, I don't want to speak for them, but they are in direct competition. So maybe I should let JC and company speak on that, but just from my outside perspective, I think it's interesting. And I think the efforts would be much better off put together. Put your heads together. Why not? Dalton says there are only two collectives, Rise and Garnet Trust. Park Avenue is being paid by Carolina Rise to broker sponsorships for athletes within the program because the NCAA blocked the athletics department from doing it. Well, I mean, they still do exist. I get what you're saying. Even if there's two. I don't know, man. It feels weird, and again, I thought JC's words were very strong. I thought they were very strong. It's funny too. And this is kind of a side note, but I saw somebody say that, Garnet Trust is maybe the little bit more Garnet Glasses entity. And I mean, we've done things in regards to partnering with student athletes and giving back to USC but that's why you're never going to see TSUS as like a leader in the NIL space, because how can I speak objectively on anything if I'm literally filling the pockets of a certain player? Like, how can I speak objectively on his performance? How can I speak objectively on the football team? I mean, it can be somewhat of a conflict of interest. Let's jump to the phone lines here.
Call from.
What's going on, man? How are you?
How you doing, Chris? It's me, Justin.
Justin, what's up?
Go, my friend.
Yeah, what's up, man? I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. Hey, Chris, I listened to Dog Loggins today. Hey, Chris, it's been a long time since we held for Dog Loggins, huh?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm excited what Dowell Loggins had to say yesterday. I think that there's reasons to be optimistic for sure, man.
Oh, yeah. I like your speech yesterday. It was pretty cool, Chris, because you said we would change up the offense a little bit. Like, hey, Chris, I'm not saying talking trying to be like the Oklahoma offense, right, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be like the Oklahoma offense, but it'll be much simpler. I mean, based off what they've said, it'll be simpler, easier to for the players to execute on and get the ball to your playmakers and make big plays. And that's what we all want to see.
Yeah, and Chris, you go back to Marcus Safford's offense. They did. That's getting not what that way did, Chris.
Yeah, no. Hey, listen, I'm glad Sat's going, man. I'm glad Sat's going.
Yeah, because it took a while to get used to Safford's system because they did not kick it till late season,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, because you want to do offense, you want to stop fast, right, Chris?
I mean, you definitely want to stop. I think the primary goal is to stop the run this year.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, you got to start the run. You always got to score a lot of touchdowns. And yes, you defense got to stay on. You defense got to get started the rest on the field, huh, Chris?
Yeah, dude, for sure. I think you can expect to see an aggressive defense this season, Justin, no doubt.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Chris, before I got here, man, I went to Moore Beach I drove my time at Moore Beach the other day.
Nice. How was Myrtle?
Pretty good. Hey, Chris, I did some fun things at the beach, and I went to see, hey, Chris, have you seen Barbie the movie yet?
I have not seen Barbie the movie yet, Justin. How was it?
It was good. It was pretty funny. I enjoyed it. That's the first comic movie I ain't seen in a long time, Chris?
Yeah, that's awesome, man. You didn't see Oppenheimer as well, did you? You just saw the Barbie movie?
Yeah, they say you gotta go see Barbie movie first, then you gotta go see Oppenheimer second,
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Hey,
that
Chris,
makes sense.
Oh yeah. Hey, Chris, what do you know about Oppenheimer? This dude is about to destroy the world, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's about the bomb. I don't know much other than it's very long and very good. So I have not seen it yet either, though.
Yeah. So they say it's good because let me tell you, the guy he designed stuff pretty good, right, Chris?
He did indeed, man. Yeah, it's I might have to go see that one. I don't know yet, but we'll see.
Yeah, and Chris, we talked about Pat Tran, man. It's a mess.
About what now?
The Pat Tran, it's a mess.
Oh, dude, for sure, dude. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Pac-12. I mean, Colorado going to the Big 12, not totally shocking, but yeah, I don't know what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I'm not shocked. I think Colorado. Listen, Chris, we know they're gonna go big. We know they're gonna go back to big track at some point, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, I with the Pac-12 crumbling, yeah. No, absolutely. I don't think it's surprising at all that Colorado is heading back.
Yeah, and think about Coach Pond. He has to be in the Pac transition, and next year he's gonna go to a big trade. Is that something, Chris?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. And I think they'll do well. It'll be interesting to see how Deion's tenure there plays out for sure. Justin, I appreciate you calling in, my guy.
Oh, yeah.
Always a pleasure to hear from you.
You too, Chris. Take care, my friend.
Hey, be good, Justin. We'll talk soon. Great stuff, my guy, Justin. I want to try to get into your questions, guys. We won't take a break for another 10 minutes or so. Let's get into lots of questions here. Lynn Turner says DK5 is a Gamecock legend. Will be a fan favorite as long as there are fans who have seen him play, regardless of what happens this year. I just hope this year is his breakout year for him. We all hope so, Lynn. I mean, absolutely. I think that goes without saying. Yeah. Kens, when did the show change? Its format have been gone since last football season. Well, Kens, welcome back, first off. The show changed the format a couple of months ago.
Call from
Dalton.
Dalton, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, I wanted to call in just because we were talking about NIL a little bit, and I wanted to know if you read the new bill that's being proposed in the Senate by Tommy Tuberville is sponsoring it. What do you think about it, and do you think it should be passed into law or not?
So admittedly, Dalton, I have not read it like thoroughly to where I could sit here and give you, a real educated answer. If I'm being totally honest, from what I've seen on it, it feels like it's going to make, or what it sounds like it will make, these guys more so like paid employees is what I've picked up. But again, I have not sat down and read it thoroughly front to back, anything like that. So I don't want to speak on it and give an opinion when I just, because again, Dalton, I admittedly am out here like NIL, like it's not my favorite thing to talk about because it's just, I'm not in the NIL world like that. I'm not engulfed in it. It just kind of is one of those things we sort of just have to acknowledge and deal with because it's such a part of college football. But it sounds like from, again, what I've heard, that it's moving college football closer to the paid employee approach, which again, I don't know if you've read it, so you might be able to educate me a little bit more on it.
I mean, I haven't read the proposal, but most likely when a bill does actually get onto the floor of the Senate for a vote, and if it is passed through the Senate, I'll read whatever is passed through the Senate, because most likely this bill is going to go through a bunch of different versions of amendments. The initial bill that's being proposed right now is not, probably what we're going to end up with if it does end up getting signed into law. But I'm just wondering, what's your kind of opinion on whether or not the federal government should be involved in college athletics to this extent, or, like a lot of others are echoing, or if you think the federal government needs to step in and sort of regulate it because the NCAA is sort of unable to do anything at this point.
Well, I mean, to your point, Dalton, you just made the point. I think they have to. I mean, I think they have to step in because, if the NCAA tries to do anything, it's the lawsuits are going to be flying left and right. So, somebody above them has to come in and make some sort of set of rules. And when you're talking about people getting paid like employees, like we need some people who know what the hell is going on. I mean, listen, we opened Pandora's box, man. It's here to stay, and it's not going anywhere, and it's only getting bigger and badder. And people like Shannon Terry out there are, good on him, but they're out there really embracing this and the NIL valuations on their websites. And like, I mean, this is only the beginning. Like we're not going to look up in 5 years or 10 years and say, man, remember when NIL happened? That was a good time. Like this is going to be at the forefront. And so, and I know some hate to hear that because, I was going to say that amateurism is going out the window. It's gone. Amateurism is gone. Like it is. It is a thing of the past. It's a fallacy, at least for the top tier guys. Now, is everybody living that out? Not necessarily, but I mean, listen, I think if there's going to be real change and real structure, I think it's got to go. I think it's got to go beyond the NCAA, Dalton. I mean, I think the NCAA has proven they're as incompetent as it gets. I mean, the fact they rolled this out there with no sort of rules or regulations, I think that only proves that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see sort of what this develops into. Most likely, it's going to take a lot of political arguments back and forth, like I said, amendments. This isn't even close to being a done deal at all. Just because everybody understands how, partisan it is inside the Senate and House of Representatives. But I do agree that ultimately there does need to be federal legislation on this. And, you just hope that they come to a compromise and something that can, make the college athletics landscape better, not worse at the end of the day.
For sure. I mean, I don't have the answers, Dalton. There's folks, thankfully, that are much smarter than me, that are in those positions of power, that will try to figure this thing out. But, I just say again, NIL's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The whole tampering thing. And I don't know what they can really do. I'll be honest with you. I don't know, outside of, again, just putting some structure in place. I mean, making it harder to, I will say, I think limiting the transfer portal stuff would help, because I think a lot of the problems is not just that NIL or transfer portal. It's the fact they were released simultaneously, and you really open it up for free agency without the structure that like the NFL has. So, that's when it becomes the wild, wild west. Heck, Shane Beamer spoke on it, I believe, at Media Days, when he said it makes it really tough when, like, you build relationships with guys and then it gets down the stretch and they don't come to your school. And it's because of things that are not football related. And he was obviously alluding to NIL, but it's the nature of the beast. And, it's one of those things. Be careful about complaining about it, because, I mean, come on, man, let's call it for what it is. South Carolina got Nick Harbor because of NIL. South Carolina got Spencer Rattler because of NIL. It may have not been the only reason, but it was part of it. It was a big time reason. So you live by the sword, die by the sword. And you just got to keep up with the times and make adjustments and be able to think on your feet, because it's not going anywhere.
Well, I would just recommend that next time you have Jake Crane on, I saw an interview where David Cohn and Blaine Crane, Jake Crane's brother, were doing an interview with Senator Tuberville, obviously former Auburn head football coach, and so he's, I think, one of the reasons why this bill is probably more well thought out, a little bit better than most, as far as a starting point for discussions on a federal NIL bill, is because Senator Tuberville has sort of been in both worlds. He was a college football coach before he was a senator. So I'm excited to see where this goes, but it's definitely a different world. And until NIL sort of gets back on the rails and there's some structure to it, I don't think the college football landscape is going to get better, to be honest.
Fair points, Dalton. We shall see what happens, man. It's going to be really interesting to follow. I appreciate you calling in, man. Always a pleasure to hear from you.
You have a good one.
Yeah, man. Take care. Great stuff from our friend Dalton, giving some real perspective on NIL. We got a text here. Fun fact: South Carolina is undefeated when they're featured on College Game Day. I hate to tell you, but fun fact, that's not true, because the last time South Carolina had game day was 2014, South Carolina, Missouri, and they lost that game. So I don't know where that stat came from, but I hate to burst your bubble. It is inaccurate. Anyways, guys, as we keep moving, let's jump to the phone lines here.
Call from
Robbie Davis, Zachary Hall.
Robbie, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I appreciate you asking what's going on.
Two things real quick before I get to what I'm going to talk about. One, my dad has a show coming up in the upstate on the 18th of this coming month. He is headlining a show. I'll send you the poster after the phone call, okay? And shout out to Tanner Land. He asked me to give him a shout out, so shout out to him. So
very nice.
I hope he didn't get sunburnt, because he was by the pool whenever he asked me to. So
very good.
Give him a shout out. Anyways, anywho, I'm gonna be pulling hard for DK this year, okay? Because if anybody on our roster this year deserves a storybook ending to his Gamecock career, it is the Kerryon Joyner, okay? Because because like you said earlier on in the show, he said in a press conference that he was a quarterback and he came to South Carolina to play quarterback, okay? But he ended up not playing quarterback hardly at all, and instead he moved to wide receiver, played wide receiver for a year or two, and then now he's at running back, okay? So in my opinion, he absolutely deserves a storybook ending to his career because I'm still shocked that he did not leave, okay? So I am hoping and praying that he gets a very good ending to his college career, okay? And I think he can do that as long as he just keeps his head down and he works at it. So I will be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, he's got all the tools. I mean, he's put on the size. He's got the athleticism. I think the big question for the Kerryon Joyner is just transitioning to playing the running back position and the nuances of it and the different things you do. And, Brian Dean in the question says, Chris, do you think DK's name starting running back on today? I do at this point. I do. I think the Kerryon Joyner's named as starting running back, but I mean, how they handle that position to me is fascinating just because I'd be stunned unless somebody really, truly distances themselves in fall camp. I mean, I don't see one guy getting the bulk of the carries. Like, I think they're going to, especially early in the season, like, okay, let's kind of figure out what we have, so which it very could be to Kerryon Joyner. It could be DJ Braswell. It could be any of those guys. So,
but if it was me, okay, this is what I would do. If I had no idea who my starting running back was going to be, I would basically do running back by committee, okay? Keep fresh legs in there at all times, okay? Because you don't want one running back getting the bulk of the carries and all of a sudden something happens and you're down a running back, okay? So what I would do in this situation, okay, is constantly have fresh legs in there because a running back gets hit quite a bit whenever they are running the football. Okay.
Yeah.
So if it was me, I would have fresh legs in there constantly. I would tell all my running backs, be ready to go in because I'm going to keep fresh legs in there at all times as much as possible.
That's fair, Robbie. I think that's what I'm expecting. I think they are going to be running back by committee. So we shall see. I mean, there's talent in the room, but just a bevy of question marks for sure. So,
but and like you said, we'll see what happens. But I would not be surprised if it was a running back by committee situation.
Indeed, I'm expecting that as well. Robbie, I appreciate you calling, man. I'm gonna try to get to. I've missed a lot of questions today, so I'm gonna try to get back into these. But yeah, man,
no problem.
Great comments as always, man.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Yeah, Robbie, take care, man. Appreciate you. Great stuff from Robbie Davis. Let's get back into these questions again. I know I've missed a lot of them. Let's see. I saw Lynn talking about. Travis says, let's face it, if the O-line doesn't bring the pail and nastiness this year, it's going to be a struggle for all of our running backs. We know this. Open up the holes, big uglies. I mean, Travis, you're right. We could spend all day talking running backs, but if that O-line don't open holes, what difference does it make, right? I mean, truly. Jeff Gullidge says 65% of the Gamecocks fan base will implode if Carolina goes 7-5. Do you think so? I mean, that's a great question, man, to ask. Like, do we feel like if Carolina goes 7-5, that I think I'm honestly, I mean, there's your occasional folks out there listening, and I'm not trying to come at any of you, but as I mentioned yesterday, you know what the beauty of being objective is and being real and having the unpopular opinion? Let's say going into next year, I picked Carolina to go 10-2. Let's just say I did, right? You would know I wasn't bullshitting you. You'd be like, okay, we must be for real because this dude, he keeps it a buck. He keeps it 100. He never bullshits. Like, so for him to pick this record, it ain't just garnet glasses, whatever bias. He believes it. There's some people out there, man, that like, bro, I'm sorry. If you're out there picking 9-3, 10-2, 11-1 every year, I respect all predictions, but you pick it every year. Like, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you pick that every year. Like, how much credence can I give your pick? For the most part, though, from what I've seen, and maybe it's just because I interact with the right people, follow the right people, I think this fan base has pretty realistic expectations going in the year. I do. I think they do. I don't think for the most part. I'll tell you this: if you go 7-5, the Clemson game, the season basically all hinges on the Clemson game. If you go 7-5, if you go 7-5 and beat Clemson, I think people are ecstatic. I think maybe not ecstatic. I think people are really, really happy. I think people are really content. Chance to win an 8th in a bowl game. I think folks are happy. And I mean, on the contrary, I think if you go 8-4 but lose to Clemson, how do people feel? If you go 8-4 but lose to Clemson, I think 7-5, people would rather go 7-5 and beat Clemson. I think that goes without saying. And that's why I said that you could really list that game as the most important. Just because of, dude, if you're not winning the SEC title, if you're not winning the East, I mean, the next best thing you can do is beat your rival, right? So it is an important game, no doubt. But I think if you go 7-5, and there's going to be, especially depending on how it happens, there's going to be some disgruntled folks out there. But I think for the most part, I heard it phrased by somebody else this way, and I think this is perfectly said. There's your 10% over the top, positive, optimistic Garnet Glasses. They never say a bad word about their team. There's your other 10% that is chicken curse, negative, doom and gloom, who Shane Beamer has addressed on occasion. And then every fan base, the 80% is just your normal, everyday fan that I think keeps things in perspective and has realistic expectations. Now, the 80% is not more important than that other 20% I was just talking about, right? It's not. It's not. All of those facets are important. They do serve a purpose, all of the facets. Especially that 10% that's uplifting, positive, Garnet Glasses crew. Like, that's great. That's great. That's great if that's how you want to operate. But I think the 80% is what will outweigh everything. And so I think 7-5, I think the 80% is very, they realize that is a realistic possibility. They realize that. Progress, and Austin Gregory, I see him commenting, he made this point too. Progress is not linear. Like Bryce Coon said, 7-5 is not some major step back. Like, I don't think it's fair either and that's why, I'm very confident that this team takes a step back this year, a step back, quote unquote, in regards to number of wins, because you won 7 in year 1, you won 8 in year 2. Like, it's not just going to be this upward, okay, well, we're going to win 9 this year, we're going to win 10 the next, we're going to win 11 the next. Like, there's going to be some bumps in the road, man. It's just the nature of sport. It's the nature of college football. So, it's why I've said too, if there's any team in the SEC East that I have to pick that I think will take a step back, it's South Carolina. I mean, really, truly. Now, I've got the Gamecocks going 7-5, 4-4 in SEC play and finishing 3rd, with all that being said. And it's because South Carolina achieved such a level last year. If Carolina would have went 6-6 last year, I'd have said, oh, they're gonna take a step forward, because I think this team wins more than 6 games. But Kentucky's going to improve. I think Mizzou absolutely could win more than 6 games. Now, Florida could take a step back, to be fair. I want to go ahead and throw that out there. But I just, progress is not linear. It's not. And so I think to expect South Carolina, it's just going to keep going up. Like, that's a dream scenario, but it's a dream. It's real. I don't think it's reality. I think it's la-la land. I think it's fairy dust. It doesn't exist, as they said in Wolf of Wall Street. So, how about this? Tennessee head coach Jeremy Pruitt has been hired as a PE teacher at Plainview High School in Alabama. What a weird headline. Luke RJ, 10-3 is what I want to happen. It's still very reasonable. That is still reasonable. 5-3 in SEC with a win at home against Clemson. Fair enough. I mean, I want 15-0. I mean, personally, but Jeff Gullidge says, I don't think they do. I feel like we'll be 7-5, hoping 8-4 better, but most of the fans, solely based on the way we ended last year, they think it's 9 wins or more or it's a failure. Jeff Gullidge, if you think it's 9 wins or more if it's a failure, you have not followed South Carolina football long enough. I'm sorry, dude. Until proven otherwise, that's crazy. That's a crazy mentality to go into this year. Again, this is so identical. This is so identical. Talking about Tennessee and Clemson and Notre Dame, this is so identical to last year when folks said, we're going to do what we did in the Mayo Bowl. We're going to do the exact same thing. Like, it's just not that simple. And who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Rattler throws for 430 and 6 touchdowns against North Carolina. We're having a way different conversation. I hope that happens. I hope that happens. Austin Gregory, have you thought about releasing SEC wide receiver running back power rankings like you did with quarterbacks? Great. Austin Gregory, that's a great point. I'm glad you asked that question. So the week that I go out of town to Montana, that'll be like the 21st to the 25th or something. I think that week I will release lists like that. And the plan is this. There will be no TDC, but we are going to have podcasts lined up with special guests to release Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that like the podcast doesn't go into some hiatus or what have you. And heck, I might even have Vanderbilt commentary on the Vandy Hawaii game, best bet, all that stuff that I'll pre-record and have it set to release that Thursday, that Friday, what have you. So, because obviously I'm not going to leave you guys high and dry for an entire week when we're that close to football season. And so, yes, Austin, lists like that will happen that week while we're out of town. So that's a great point, though. I appreciate you. Austin, what brings you to Montana? Family. Austin, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to do BCC hangouts while in Montana. I will be busy with family. So not just my family, but Miss TSUS's family. So that is a trip where we are meeting some relatives that, are on the back nine, we shall say. So we want to make sure we maximize the time out there, and we'll be hiking, going to Yellowstone. Really, it's going to be a really great experience. I'll be commenting. I don't know that we can do hangouts. I'll be communicating with you guys, but going to be pretty busy. So Jeff Gullidge is exactly, I'm telling you, the majority of the fan base believes it's 9 wins or more. I would love it, but I just don't see it happening. I've been a fan too long to know it less likely than more likely. I mean, yeah, Jeff, I think it's more likely Carolina goes 6-6 than 9-3, if you want my honest opinion. I really do. Because South Carolina has overcome the reason the computers hate South Carolina. There's 2 ways to look at it, like we talked about it yesterday. The reason the computers hate South Carolina, I don't think it's just because, well, the world hates the Gamecocks and ESPN hates the Gamecocks. There are real reasons. South Carolina has finished outside of the top 100 in rush defense. They've led the SEC in turnovers. Like, there are reasons why that FPI spits out 5.5. There are reasons why Kelly Ford spits out 5.7. On the other side, right? You have to give credit to the fact that South Carolina has won despite it. They've won despite it. That's because of their culture, and that's because they maximize special teams and they maximize their talent, and they're opportunistic. And you have to give credit to that. But you also have to realize that's a very slippery slope. And it's gone the right way for South Carolina in Shane Beamer's first 2 years. It can go the other way. It can very much so go the other way, and that's what I think you have to be really weary and really cautious of if you're a Gamecock fan. And you have to keep that into perspective. For South Carolina to hit 9-3, guys, everything would have to click. Every question mark this football team has would have to work out in South Carolina's favor. That's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. Getting back to 8 wins would be a magnificent season. 7-5 would be a fine year. And 6-6 is very much so in the scope of reality when you factor in the numbers the previous 2 seasons and if they don't improve on some of those drastically. Brian Dean, we got the toughest schedule in the country. 7-5 is very successful. For sure. Jacob E. says that's why Moneyball never won the World Series. Numbers don't tell the whole story. Jacob E., you're right. You're right. You're right. We shall see if that's the case. The 3rd year in a row to Beamer. Guys, we've hit 3 o'clock. Hey, appreciate you all tuning in. What an electric show today. Thank you all so much again for the continued love and support. By the way, check it out. The Beat UNC shirts are officially live. We posted those on social media. Also, by the way, we're getting into women's merchandise. Hats are also on the way. Please be patient, but we're getting into women's merchandise. We just dropped a Beamer Ball crop tank on tsus.store. The SpursUpShow.com is also where it can be found. I will post that on social media today. Really excited to dive deeper into women's merchandise. Also, guys, of course, make sure you're on YouTube. You hit that subscribe button. You hit that bell icon so you get notifications of when we go live and when we drop new video content. And also, of course, hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. They release every single day, 5 p.m. Eastern. Also, rate the show, review, give us 5 stars. We appreciate it. Guys, thank you all so much. Appreciate you all tuning in. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.